How do you get a bully to snitch on themselves? My bully made fun of me so much that he triggered a school shooting lockdown. It all started when I was sitting alone in the cafeteria. TJ grabbed my free lunch tray and tossed it into the trash can, grinning as 30 kids watched him literally take food out of a poor kid's mouth for entertainment. Oops. Guess you'll have to wait for food stamps. But whenever I told my parents about it, it was always the same response. Please just stop causing trouble. You see, his parents owned half the businesses in town, including the diner where both my parents worked double shifts. Standing up for myself meant getting evicted, and he knew this all too well. But on that same Tuesday, TJ had something special planned. We were in Miss Louise's history class when she got called to the office. TJ immediately spun around. You, food stamps, where's your friends at? I was just staring at my Chromebook pretending I didn't exist, but my hands were already doing that shaky thing. He started going through my stuff like he owned the place. That's when he found it. The photo tucked inside my notebook of me and my mom at her citizenship ceremony. Her proudest moment. Oh my gosh. He held it up. Is this your mom? Look at her crying. He started doing this exaggerated fake Chinese accent. I'm so happy to be American. I clean toilet real good now. The whole class went dead silent. I give good happy ending. I learned from my son. My face was going red. What's wrong? TJ grinned. Can't take a joke? Maybe that's why your dad drinks so much. I'd drink too if... Shut up. Ooh, he speaks. Hey everyone. The yellow poverty boy found his voice. He pulled out his phone. Number. Not this. It was a video from his dad's diner. My mom was cleaning tables at 2 a.m. and some drunk customer yelled at her. She was just taking it, nodding, apologizing for something that wasn't even her fault. Anything to keep putting food on our table. TJ turned the volume all the way up. Yes, sir. So sorry, sir. I fix right away, sir. I could hear her exhaustion, see her shoulders sagging. The whole class was watching my mother get humiliated in high definition. That was when I noticed the red button under Ms. Louise's desk. Your whole family's pathetic, TJ continued. At least my parents own things instead of cleaning them. Something inside me went quiet. The shaking stopped. You know what, TJ? You're right. You're so much braver than me. He blinked. Obviously. So brave that you'd do anything, right? Not like scared little me. What are you talking about, you freak? I leaned back, weirdly calm now. There's a button under Luce's desk. Red one. So? So press it. The room went still. Why would I? Because you won't. All that tough guy stuff? It's just daddy's money. Take that away and you're nothing. Too scared to press one little button. His face went red. I'm not scared of anything. Prove it. That's stupid. That's what I thought. I turned away. Guess the Littleson family was all talk. Your dad acted tough at the diner too, but everyone knew he was just... TJ slammed his hand on my desk. Shut your mouth about my family. He stormed over to Miss Louise's desk. The whole class held their breath. His finger hovered over it. This is what actual courage looks like, he announced. Click. For 10 seconds, nothing. TJ started laughing. You're so pathetic, you... Wee ooh. Police sirens. They were heading straight towards us. The principal's voice exploded over the intercom. Lockdown! This is not a drill! Repeat! This is not a drill! Red and blue lights flooded through every window. There was a helicopter. TJ was still at the desk, frozen. It was just a button. Hands visible. Nobody move. A SWAT team burst through the door, rifles drawn. TJ dropped to the floor, sobbing. He told me to! He made me. They evacuated the entire school. Mr. Littleson had to push through cameras to get to his son, his face purple with rage. The expulsion was immediate. It turned out pressing a school's emergency threat button was a felony. Who knew? But my revenge was short-lived. Because that night, my parents came home from the diner looking defeated. They'd both been let go. No explanation needed, we all knew why. I figured that was it. TJ was expelled, my parents were unemployed, but at least it was over. I was wrong. A week later, there was a knock at our door. It was Mr. Littleson, and as soon as my mom opened it, he strolled in without even taking off his shoes. Your son cost me a lot this week, he said calmly. Bad publicity, legal fees, my son's future. He turned to me. But I'm willing to make all these problems go away. My mom grabbed my hand. Just hear him out, she whispered. All you have to do, Mr. Littleson continued, is agree to my terms. What he said next made me realize that pranking his son wasn't enough revenge. I had to destroy him. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and started laying papers across our kitchen table like he was dealing cards. Simple terms, he said while my mom's hand got tighter around mine. Your son goes in front of the school board next week and tells everyone he tricked my boy into pressing that button. He slid the first paper toward us, and I could see it was already typed up with my name at the bottom waiting for a signature. He admits to manipulating an innocent student into triggering a false emergency. The second paper came sliding over, and this one had way more legal words on it. Then you all sign this NDA about any alleged incidents at the diner or anywhere else involving my family. My dad was standing by the sink, and I could see his knuckles going white from gripping the counter. In exchange, you both get your jobs back tomorrow morning with full back pay for this week. Mr. Littleson leaned back in our creaky kitchen chair and looked around our tiny apartment. Or you can keep being stubborn and see how long you last without any income in this town. He stood up and left the papers on our table. You have until Monday to decide. He walked out without closing the door behind him, and we could hear his expensive shoes clicking down the hallway. Nobody moved for the longest time, and I just stared at those papers, while my mom finally let go of my hand to rub her temples. Dad walked over and quietly shut the door, then came back to the table and picked up the papers one by one, reading them carefully. 20 minutes went by with just the sound of the clock ticking and cars passing outside our window. We need those jobs, Dad finally said, but he was looking at me, not Mom. But I'm not going to force you to lie about what that kid did to you. Mom started crying quietly, and Dad put his arm around her shoulders. We'll figure something out. That night I couldn't sleep, so I grabbed my laptop and started searching everything I could about retaliation and labor laws. Most of the legal websites were super confusing with all these big words and references to different acts and statutes, but I kept bookmarking pages that mentioned wrongful termination. I found this one site about whistleblower protections that said employers couldn't fire people for reporting illegal stuff, and I wondered if bullying counted. There was another page about retaliation that explained how it was illegal to punish employees for their family members' actions, and I took screenshots of everything. By 3 a.m., I had like 40 tabs open, and my eyes were burning, but I kept reading about cases where people sued their employers and won. The next morning at breakfast, I showed my parents some of the stuff I found and told them we shouldn't sign anything yet. Let's just explore our options first, I said, while Mom poured coffee with shaky hands. Maybe there's another way. They both looked scared, but Dad nodded and said we could wait a few days before deciding anything. School felt weird without TJ there, but his friends kept shooting me dirty looks in the hallway. After history class, I waited for everyone to leave, then approached Ms. Louisa, who was erasing the whiteboard. Can I ask you something? She turned around, and I could tell she already knew what this was about. I was wondering if you'd be willing to confirm that you left the classroom that day when you got called to the office. She put down the eraser and looked uncomfortable. I'll think about it, she said quietly, and then started packing up her stuff really fast. At lunch, I was sitting in my usual corner spot picking at my replacement free lunch when this kid Tyrone from the school paper walked up to my table. Mind if I sit? He didn't wait for an answer and pulled out his phone. I've been documenting TJ's crap for months, he said, and started scrolling through his camera roll. Got tons of videos from the cafeteria. He turned the phone toward me, and there it was, clear as day, TJ grabbing my tray and tossing it in the trash while everyone laughed. This one's from last week, Tyrone said, and swiped to another video where TJ was making those same racist comments about my mom. Been building a file since my cousin was his target last year. The quality was perfect, and you could hear everything TJ said, including stuff I'd forgotten about. Would you share these with the right people when the time comes? I asked, and Tyrone immediately nodded. Already been waiting for someone to actually do something about him, he said, and gave me his number. Just text me when you need them. After school, I walked 12 blocks to the community center where they had signs about free legal aid on Wednesdays. The waiting room was packed with people, and the lady at the desk said it would be at least a 3-hour wait, but I signed in anyway. I sat there doing homework and watching people go in and out of the little offices until finally around 6 p.m. they called my name. The attorney was this woman named Allison Novak, who had papers everywhere on her desk and looked tired, but she listened to my whole story without interrupting once. When I finished explaining about my parents getting fired right after the button incident, she immediately sat up straighter. Your parents have a really strong retaliation case, she said, and started writing notes on a yellow pad. They can't legally fire someone because their kid reported bullying or triggered a legitimate safety concern. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card with her name and the legal aid office number on it. Have your parents call me tomorrow morning to set up a formal consultation. She started writing on a yellow notepad again. And you need to start documenting everything that's happened with dates and times and any witnesses who were there. I took the card and nodded while she kept talking about how important evidence would be. She said to write down everything I could remember about TJ and his dad, and to get my parents to do the same with their work stuff. When I finally left the office, it was getting dark, and I had to run to catch the last bus home. My parents were already eating dinner when I walked in, and I could tell they'd been worried about where I was. I showed them Allison's card and explained everything she'd said about the retaliation case. Mom's hands started shaking again, but Dad looked more hopeful than he had in days. After dinner, I grabbed a notebook and started writing down every single thing TJ had done to me since freshman year. Mom sat next to me and helped me remember specific dates, like when he dumped chocolate milk on my head during the winter dance. Dad got his own paper and started listing all the schedule changes at work and the times missed her. Littleson had yelled at them for no reason. We stayed up until midnight working on our lists, and by the time we were done, we had 12 pages of stuff. The next morning, Mom called Allison's office while Dad was getting ready for his job search. They put her on speaker, and Allison explained the whole process and what documents they'd need to bring. She said Friday afternoon would work for a meeting, and Dad immediately said yes, even though he had an interview scheduled then. This is more important, he told Mom after hanging up. At the school the next day, everything felt different without TJ there, but his friends were still around giving me looks. During lunch, I walked over to where Sarah Cruz was sitting with her friends. She'd been in our history class when TJ pressed the button, and I knew she'd seen him bullying me before. I asked if I could talk to her for a second, and she followed me to a quieter spot by the lockers. Would you be willing to write down what you saw TJ do to me? I asked. She looked nervous and glanced around like someone might be watching. I don't want problems with his family, she said. I told her it would just be for documentation and she wouldn't have to testify or anything. She thought about it for a minute, then said, okay. I found 2 other kids who'd been in classes where TJ had messed with me. Galen agreed right away because TJ had bullied his little brother last year. Nicole took more convincing, but finally said she'd write something short about what she'd seen. Between classes, the principal's secretary found me and said I needed to come to the office immediately. The principal was sitting behind his big desk with his hands folded when I walked in. I heard you've been asking students to write statements, he said. I didn't say anything. The Littlesons have been very generous to this school and this community, he continued. Their offer to resolve this situation is more than fair. He leaned forward and looked at me over his glasses. I strongly suggest you consider accepting it for the sake of everyone involved. I told him I'd think about it, and he frowned but let me leave. After school, I was walking to the bus stop when Ms. Louisa called my name from behind. She caught up to me and looked around to make sure no one was listening. I wanted you to know I'll provide a written statement about leaving the classroom that day, she said quietly. I should have been more responsible and I'm sorry you had to deal with TJ alone. She said she'd already written it up and would give it to whoever needed it. I thanked her, and she walked away quickly like she didn't want anyone to see us talking. Friday came fast, and my parents both dressed up nice for the meeting with Allison. Dad had canceled his warehouse interview, but said getting justice was worth it. We took 2 buses to get to the legal aid office and signed in at the front desk. Allison's office was even messier than before with files everywhere, but she cleared a space for us to sit. She spent 2 hours explaining how my parents could file complaints with the State Labor Board and the EEC for discrimination. The process could take several months, she said while showing us forms. But you have really strong grounds, especially with the timing of the firing. She pulled out another folder and started talking about Mr. Littleson's demands. Him asking for an NDA could actually be witness tampering since there's a criminal investigation about the emergency button, she explained. That gives you unexpected leverage in negotiations. My parents looked confused, so she explained it more simply. Saturday morning, Dad's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Mr. Littleson saying he heard we were making things complicated, and that would be unfortunate for everyone. The message said we should reconsider his offer before things got difficult for our family in this small town. Dad showed it to Mom and me, and we all knew it was a threat, even though he was careful with his words. Dad forwarded the screenshot to Allison right away without responding to Mr. Littleson. Within an hour, Allison texted back saying this was perfect evidence of harassment and intimidation. She said not to respond to any messages from him and to document everything. I'll send him a cease and desist letter on Monday about the harassment, she wrote. Monday morning came way too fast, and when I got to the school, I could feel everyone staring at me. Walking to my locker, I noticed kids whispering and pointing like I was some kind of celebrity for all the wrong reasons. When I turned the corner to my hallway, I saw it right away. Someone had written snitch across my locker in thick black marker that covered half the metal door. I pulled out my phone and took 3 different pictures from different angles, making sure the timestamp showed clearly. A group of TJ's friends stood at the end of the hall watching me, and one of them made a throat-cutting motion with his finger. I ignored them and tried to open my locker, but the marker was still wet and got all over my hands. The janitor saw me struggling and came over with some cleaning spray, but shook his head when he saw what it said. During second period, Tyrone found me in the library and showed me his laptop screen. He'd written an article for the school paper called When Protection Becomes Persecution, and even though he didn't use any names, everyone would know exactly what he was talking about. The article talked about how bullying victims often face punishment for reporting, while the actual bullies get protected by money and connections. He'd included statistics about unreported harassment and quotes from anonymous students about being afraid to speak up. The newspaper advisor had already approved it for Friday's edition, and Tyrone said the principal couldn't legally stop it since no names were mentioned. That afternoon when I got home, Mom was on the phone speaking rapid Mandarin to someone, and I could tell she was excited. She hung up and told me 3 other workers from the diner had called her after hearing about our situation. They all had stories about the Littlesons treating them badly and not paying overtime and making them work through breaks. One woman said Mr. Littleson had fired her cousin for taking a sick day when her kid was in the hospital. Another said they made her work a double shift while she had the flu because they threatened to cut her hours if she went home. Mom wrote down all their names and phone numbers and said they wanted to join whatever complaint we were filing. Tuesday morning, Allison called to say she'd filed the formal complaints with both the State Labor Board and the EECC. She'd included everything we'd documented, plus the evidence of retaliatory firing and the pattern of discrimination against immigrant workers. The complaints were 30 pages long with all our evidence attached, including the timeline I'd made and statements from the other workers. She said the agencies would have to respond within 30 days, but usually they moved faster on cases with clear retaliation. Wednesday afternoon, the diner got served with official notice from the Labor Board. They were under investigation and had to provide all employee records going back 2 years, including time cards and pay stubs and scheduling documents. The investigator also wanted to interview current and former employees about working conditions. Mom heard from her friend who still worked there that Mr. Littleson had been yelling on the phone all afternoon, and his lawyer had been at the diner for 3 hours. Thursday at the school felt weird without TJ there, but his friends made sure I didn't forget about him. During history class, someone threw a paper ball at the back of my head hard enough to sting. When I turned around, 3 kids were looking at their desks, trying not to laugh. The paper had "rat" written all over it in red pen. Miss Louisa saw it happen, but just told everyone to settle down without actually doing anything about it. After class, she pulled me aside and apologized, but said the administration had told teachers to avoid taking sides in the situation. Friday morning, the detective who'd been investigating the emergency button incident called our house. He asked me to explain again exactly what happened that day, and I told him everything, including how TJ had been harassing me for years. I explained about the photo of my mom and the video from the diner, and how he'd made racist comments about our family. The detective asked if I had any proof of the long-term harassment, and I told him about Tyrone's videos and the other students who'd witnessed it. He said he'd need to interview them too, and asked for their contact information. That weekend, my parents started seriously looking for new jobs, but it was harder than we thought. The Littlesons owned the 2 biggest restaurants in town, plus a catering company, and had connections with most other businesses. Mom filled out an application for the hospital cafeteria, and Dad applied to 3 warehouses in the next town over. The hospital seemed interested in Mom because of her experience, but said they wouldn't have an opening for 6 weeks. Dad got a call back from one warehouse, but they wanted him to work night shifts, which would mean we'd never see him. Monday of the next week, Allison called with news. Mr. Littleson's lawyer had sent her a letter offering to settle everything for 1 month of severance pay if we dropped all the complaints and signed an agreement to not discuss the situation publicly. Allison actually laughed when she read it to us over the phone. She said it was insulting considering they owed my parents way more than that just in unpaid overtime from the past 2 years. She was going to counter with a demand for 6 months' pay, plus damages, plus neutral employment references. Tuesday night was the school board meeting, and Dad said we should go to see what they were saying about the emergency button incident. The auditorium was packed with parents, and some were holding signs about school safety. The board president announced they were reviewing all emergency procedures and looking at their anti-bullying policies to see what needed to be changed. Several parents stood up during public comment to say the school had failed to protect students from bullying for years. One mom said her daughter had reported harassment 5 times with no action taken. Another parent said the emergency button situation showed how desperate kids were getting when the normal channels didn't work. Wednesday morning, Mom called me into the kitchen before school and showed me an email on her phone from the hospital saying they wanted to interview her for the cafeteria position next Monday. Her hands were shaking a little as she scrolled through it, and I could tell she was trying not to get her hopes up too much. Dad was at the table with his own phone checking his email every 5 minutes because the warehouse supervisor said he'd get back to him by the end of the week. That same afternoon at the school, I was walking to my locker when I saw a bunch of kids crowded around someone's phone watching something. When I got closer, I realized it was footage from the day TJ pressed the button. Someone had been recording the whole thing on their phone, and now it was all over social media. The video showed me calmly telling him to press it, and him actually doing it while bragging about his courage. By Thursday, the video had thousands of views, and comments were split between people calling me a genius and others saying I manipulated him. Allison called that evening with big news about our case. The labor board had completed their initial investigation at the diner and found multiple violations, including unpaid overtime for at least 15 employees and improper break policies that violated state law. She explained this gave us major leverage because the fines alone would be tens of thousands of dollars, and Mr. Littleson would want to avoid that kind of publicity. She was sending them a new settlement demand based on these findings. Friday after school, I overheard 2 women talking in the grocery store parking lot about how they used to work at the diner and never got paid for staying late to close. One of them mentioned she'd heard about our complaint through a cousin who still worked there and was thinking about joining it. By Monday, 3 more diner employees had officially contacted Allison to join our complaint, including the night shift cook who'd been there 8 years, and the weekend manager who had detailed records of all the unpaid hours. Mom went to her hospital interview that morning wearing her best outfit and came back 2 hours later with a huge smile on her face. They'd offered her the position on the spot with better hours than the diner, full health insurance, and even a small signing bonus. Dad got a call that afternoon from both warehouses he'd applied to, and they both wanted him to start as soon as possible. One was union with good benefits, but farther away, while the other was closer, but paid less. He decided on the union job because the protection and overtime pay would be worth the extra drive. Tuesday morning, the principal's secretary found me before first period and said I needed to come to the office immediately. When I walked in, the principal was there with the school counselor, Melinda Ward, who smiled at me in that fake, concerned way adults do when they think you're troubled. The principal started talking about how the whole emergency button incident had been traumatic for everyone, and maybe I should talk to someone about my feelings. Melinda nodded along and suggested weekly sessions to process what happened and help me move forward in a healthy way. I could tell what they really wanted was for me to stop causing problems and just let everything blow over. Instead of agreeing, I looked directly at Melinda and asked if she could pull up all my previous reports about TJ's bullying since she was the counselor. Her smile got tight, and she said she wasn't sure what I meant. I reminded her about the 3 times I'd come to her office about TJ taking my lunch, the time he shoved me into a locker, and when he spread rumors about my family being illegal immigrants. She shifted in her chair and said she'd have to check her files. The principal jumped in saying we should focus on moving forward, not dwelling on the past, but I kept pushing. I asked Melinda to officially document every report I'd made that hadn't been acted on, and she finally agreed to review my file, though she didn't look happy about it. Wednesday's local news at 6 opened with a story about the labor investigation at several local businesses, including the diner. The reporter stood outside the diner talking about how the state was cracking down on wage theft, and several employees had come forward with complaints. They didn't mention our family by name, but showed a shot of the diner with a closed sign in the window during what should have been lunch rush. Mr. Littleson was probably losing money every hour they stayed closed for the investigation. Thursday, both my parents started their new jobs, and the difference was immediate. Mom came home at 5:30 instead of midnight, and Dad was actually awake enough to eat dinner with us. They both seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. With steady paychecks coming from jobs where the Littlesons had no power over them, they felt brave enough to really pursue the complaints. Allison called that night to say the labor board wanted to schedule official mediation between us and Mr. Littleson to try to reach a settlement. She explained this was good because it meant they were taking it seriously and wanted to resolve it quickly. Friday, I heard through Tyrone that TJ was back in the school, but at Riverside High across town as part of his plea deal with the court. Someone's cousin went there and said TJ kept to himself now, and his parents dropped him off and picked him up every day like he was in elementary school. The cousin also mentioned TJ was seeing a counselor twice a week and wasn't allowed to have social media anymore. The mediation got scheduled for next month with a state mediator who specialized in employment disputes. Allison came to our apartment Saturday morning to prepare us and explained we should ask for back pay for all the unpaid overtime, damages for the retaliatory firing, and most importantly, a non-retaliation agreement that would prevent the Littlesons from trying to hurt us again through their business connections. Sunday night around 8, someone knocked on our door, and when Mom opened it, Mr. Littleson pushed right past her into our living room. His face was red, and he kept clenching his fists while Dad stood up from the couch real slow. Mr. Littleson pointed at me and said we needed to drop everything now or things would get worse for everyone. Dad moved between us and told him to leave right now or he'd call the cops. Mr. Littleson stared at him for like 10 seconds, then turned around and walked out, slamming the door so hard the whole wall shook. Mom locked the deadbolt and put the chain on while Dad called Allison to tell her what happened. She said to document everything and if he came back to actually call the police this time. The next week at the school, they installed cameras in all the hallways and the cafeteria, plus these new signs about reporting bullying. The principal called an assembly where he talked about the new rules and how there would be zero tolerance for harassment going forward. Melinda got put in charge of training teachers on how to spot bullying, and she had to run these workshops every Friday afternoon. I saw her in the hall carrying boxes of pamphlets about recognizing warning signs, and she gave me this weird smile like she was trying to be friendly now. The mediation finally happened 3 weeks later at this government building downtown. We sat on one side of a long table with Allison while Mr. Littleson and his lawyer sat across from us. The mediator was this older woman who kept taking notes while everyone talked. Mr. Littleson's lawyer started by offering 3 months of back pay if we signed papers saying we wouldn't sue or talk about it publicly. Allison actually laughed and said that was insulting considering the years of unpaid overtime and the illegal firing. She pulled out this thick folder of documents showing all the labor violations at the diner. She wanted 6 months' pay, plus damages, plus a written apology from Mr. Littleson admitting what he did. His lawyer whispered to him for a while, then came back with 4 months' pay, but still no apology. We went back and forth for 4 hours with breaks every hour where we'd go to separate rooms. Mom kept squeezing my hand under the table while Dad took notes on everything they said. Finally, around 2 in the afternoon, we settled on 4 months of back pay for both my parents, plus continued health insurance for 6 months, plus neutral job references. Mr. Littleson wouldn't apologize, but he had to sign papers agreeing to no contact with our family ever again. 2 weeks after that, the labor board announced their findings, and the diner got hit with a $30,000 fine. They had to post these big signs about workers' rights in English and Spanish and pay back overtime to 12 employees going back 2 years. The newspaper ran a story about it with a picture of the diner and quotes from the labor board about wage theft being a serious crime. Some of the other workers who joined our complaint got their own settlements, and one woman used her money to buy a food truck. She parked it right across from the diner every lunch and breakfast, selling better food for less money. I saw her there one morning and she waved at me with this huge smile on her face. The state started sending auditors to check the diner's books every 3 months, and they had to submit payroll reports every week now. Mr. Littleson had to hire an accountant just to deal with all the new paperwork and oversight. At the school, things got way better once everyone saw I wasn't backing down. Kids started talking to me in the halls and sitting near me at lunch. Tyrone and I got really close working on articles for the school paper about student rights and standing up to power. He showed me how to research public records, and we found out the Littlesons owed tons of back taxes on their properties. We didn't publish that, but it was good to know. Mom loved her new job at the hospital where she worked normal hours and got overtime pay when she stayed late. She came home with energy instead of looking dead tired all the time. Dad's warehouse job had union protection, so he couldn't get fired without cause, and they had to follow all the safety rules. He joined the union board after a few months and started helping other workers file grievances. Our apartment felt different now without that constant worry about money or losing jobs. We could actually save a little each month, and Mom started talking about maybe buying a small house someday. One Saturday, about 6 months later, I was at the grocery store getting milk when I turned the corner and almost ran into TJ. He was with his mom and looked way different, skinnier and quiet. We just stood there for a second, then he gave me this small nod. Not mean or friendly, just like acknowledging I existed. His mom pulled him away quick, but that nod felt like something had shifted between us, even if we'd never be anything close to friends. The next week, Melinda Ward sent me an email asking if I could stop by her office after school. I walked in and she had this stack of papers on her desk plus a box of tissues, which seemed weird. She closed the door and sat down across from me instead of behind her desk. She said she'd been reviewing all the incident reports from the past 3 years and found 17 reports about TJ that never got proper follow-up. Her hands kept moving papers around while she talked about new protocols they were implementing. Every bullying report would now require written response within 48 hours, and parents would get copies of everything. She pulled out this thick manual they'd created with specific consequences for each type of harassment. The school board approved hiring 2 more counselors just for conflict resolution. She showed me the new anonymous reporting app students could use on their phones. 3 months later, the district's anti-bullying program got recognized by the state education department. They sent this fancy certificate and a $1,000 grant for more training. The local news did a segment about it and interviewed the principal who talked about creating safe learning environments. They wanted me to speak at the awards ceremony downtown, but I told them no thanks. I had other stuff to focus on, like college applications. The acceptance letters started showing up in March. First was State University with partial aid, then 2 rejections from expensive private schools. But then the big envelope came from my top choice with a full-ride scholarship plus work study. The financial aid letter mentioned my essay about standing up to systemic oppression and how it aligned with their values. Mom cried when she read it, and Dad took a picture of the letter to send to his brother. Around the same time, the newspaper ran another story about the Littlesons selling their second restaurant location to pay legal settlements. The labor board had expanded their investigation to all their businesses and found violations at 3 properties. They had to sell the mini golf place and one of the gas stations just to cover fines and back wages. Their remaining businesses got audited monthly now and had to submit weekly compliance reports. The diner stayed open, but with half the tables it used to have. Graduation day came in June, and the gym was packed with families. When they called my name, I walked across that stage and could hear Mom yelling something in her language from the bleachers. Dad stood up and clapped so loud people turned to look. After the ceremony, they both hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. Mom kept touching the honor cord I got for grades, and Dad said he knew I'd make it through everything. We took pictures by the school sign, and Mom posted them everywhere online. That same week, Tyrone got his acceptance letter from the journalism program at Northwestern with a $15,000 scholarship from some foundation for investigative reporting. He texted me this long message about how watching me stand up to the Littlesons showed him what real journalism could do. He was planning to focus on labor rights and corruption in small towns. His first assignment for the school paper next year would be following up on our town's story. 2 days before I left for college, Mom cooked all my favorite foods. She made spring rolls and that soup I loved, plus Dad grilled burgers outside. We sat at our little kitchen table that wobbled, and Dad poured water into the good glasses we never used. He raised his glass and said something about new beginnings in broken English. Mom added something about courage in her language. We clinked glasses and ate until we couldn't move. They gave me this card they'd both signed with money they'd saved from their new jobs. Inside, Mom wrote about being proud in her careful handwriting. Dad just wrote, "Show them who you are," in big letters. The morning I left, they loaded my stuff into Dad's truck. The dorm was 4 hours away, but they wanted to drive me. We passed the diner on the way out of town, and it looked smaller somehow with fewer cars in the lot. The new employee rights poster was visible through the window in English and Spanish, just like the law required. Mom pointed at it and smiled. At college orientation, they had us write about a time we created positive change. I wrote 3 sentences about the whole thing, then turned it in. The girl next to me had written 2 pages about organizing a beach cleanup, but I was done writing about it and ready to focus on what came next. The diner had to pay fair wages now with overtime and breaks. The school had real protection for students getting bullied. The Littlesons learned that money couldn't fix everything when you broke the law. None of it happened the way I planned, but it happened, and that was enough. Thanks for letting me wonder along with you today. Hopefully my questions added a little something extra to the experience. Until we meet again, like the video, it helps more than you think.
How did your petty sibling rivalry expose your family's darkest secret? Growing up, my brother Cian and I were like Tom and Jerry. We had beef on sight. If I saw him walking into the kitchen, I'd run at him with a knife. If he saw me brushing my teeth, he'd grab Dad's golf club and hit my head. We fought over everything. The TV remote, the first slice of pizza. We even fought over who hated each other more. Full-on fistfights that ended with Mom screaming and regular ambulance rides. We couldn't stand each other until we hit our late teens and decided to do MMA together. We had no idea it would one day destroy our family. The first time we sparred, he knocked me out. I threw him a pair of gloves that night and told him to put them on. We both went to school with black eyes the next day. Soon we were pushing each other to get better, going to the MMA gym together, and somewhere along the way became best friends. Wherever he went, I went. If you messed with me, you messed with him. 12 years later, we had our black belts. We were training at the gym one day when we heard buzzing coming from Cian's bag. He walked over, checked his phone, and saw 2 missed calls from Mom. His eyes burst open. Mom's golden rule was she never called twice, unless someone died or was about to. He called back immediately. His expression changed from confused to terrified in seconds. "We need to go. Now." He grabbed his stuff and ran for the door. I followed without asking. We rushed to the hospital. The whole drive, Cian wouldn't tell me what Mom said, just kept saying, "Hurry up." When we got to her room, I wasn't ready for what I saw. Mom was in the hospital bed with a broken nose and her face purple and swollen. She looked like she'd been in a car crash. "What happened?" Cian asked, his voice shaking. Mom started crying. "Someone broke into the house. 2 men. They beat me up." Cian's face turned to rage in seconds while I took Mom's hand. "The men didn't take anything," Mom continued. "Not my purse, not the TV, nothing. It's like they broke in to hurt me." My mind started racing. Who would do that? And why? Mom read our minds at that moment. "Maybe you can see who it was from the security video." She pointed to the phone in her jacket pocket. You see, Mom had CCTV cameras installed in her house because she was terrified of break-ins. Cian and I grabbed her phone and watched the security video together. 2 men with masks picked her lock, walked in, and went straight for her. Didn't even look at valuables. They tackled her and hit her repeatedly. It was gruesome to watch, and we almost cried. Their entire bodies were covered in black clothing. But when one of them reached up, his neck was visible for just a second. There was a tattoo there, a really distinct one. I stared at it closer. "Wait, I know that tattoo." "What?" Cian looked at me. "That's Dad's friend, Jason. He has that exact tattoo on his neck." Cian's eyes bugged out like they do before his matches. You see, 5 years ago, Dad's coworker accused our mom of cheating because she wanted Dad for herself. She showed him screenshots proving Mom was unfaithful. He believed it without talking to her. I remember he was so angry when he left. So hateful. "Do you think Dad did this?" I asked quietly. "Do you think he had Jason attack Mom? Should we tell the cops?" We sat in silence for a long time. Then Cian said something that changed everything. "We're not going to the cops." "What?" Cian snarled. "They'll get a trial and 6 months probation. Maybe. That's not real justice. We'll handle this ourselves." I looked at Mom's swollen face and nodded. "What do we do?" "We find out who did it. Then we make it right." For the next 13 months, we became investigators. We asked around about Jason. We followed him, watched where he went, who he talked to. The whole time, we trained harder than we ever had. Every punch we threw was for Mom. Every hour spent tracking brought us closer to the truth. The more we dug, the more everything pointed to Jason. He was Dad's best friend. His coworkers saw a black outfit in his bag the day Mom was attacked. He suddenly had a new car and his mortgage paid off. Dad used to have this thing where he paid people for favors in the past. When we decided it was him, we knew what to do. We picked a Friday night when Jason left his usual strip club. We waited in the parking lot. When he walked out, we stepped in front. I didn't say anything, just stared with my baseball bat in hand. Cian cracked his knuckles. Jason looked at us, at our hands, then back at our faces. "Get in the car." Jason got in. We drove to Dad's house. We'd been watching him too. We knew he was home alone. When we knocked, Dad opened the door and his reaction was priceless. We pushed past him into the house. Jason tried to back away, but we blocked him. "Tell us what you did to Mom," I said. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jason stammered. Cian punched Jason with the strength of 13 years of training and rage. He fell to the floor. "We have video. We saw your tattoo." Dad stepped between us. "Stop. Please stop." "Did you tell him to do it?" I asked Dad. "Did you have Jason beat up Mom?" "No!" Dad looked panicked. "I didn't do anything." Cian got in Dad's face. "Then who was the other person with you? Who else attacked our mom?" Dad's face crumbled as he cowered. "It wasn't me. I swear it wasn't me." "Then who?" Cian was yelling now. Dad sank into the wall. His voice came out broken. "It was my son. My other son. From before I met your mother. You don't know about him. He's 32. The room went silent. Dad had another son. A son who beat our mom half to death. Cian and I looked at each other and gave that subtle nod that meant it was time to handle business. I grabbed Dad by the collar and yank him forward until our faces are inches apart. His breath smells like fear and cheap whiskey. Cian moves fast, positioning himself between us and the front door so Jason can't make a run for it. Dad's hands shake as words tumble out of his mouth, saying his other son's name is Casper, that he's been supporting him for years without telling anyone. He claims Casper needed money and Dad told him about valuables in Mom's house. The lie is so bad it makes my blood feel like it's boiling. I shove Dad backward hard and he stumbles against the wall. Nothing was taken from Mom's house, not her purse or TV or jewelry, because this wasn't about robbery. This was about hurting her. Cian walks over to where I dropped my baseball bat and picks it up slowly, letting Dad see every movement. Dad's eyes go wide and he starts talking faster, giving us an address across town, begging us not to hurt Casper. He keeps saying Casper is just a kid who made a mistake. I laugh and it comes out bitter and angry because Casper is 32 years old, older than both of us, and he beat our mother until her face looked like raw meat. We head for the door, and I turn back to look at Dad and Jason still on the floor. If either of them calls Casper or the cops before we're done, we'll come back and finish what we started tonight. The drive to Casper's place takes 20 minutes, and neither Kian nor I say a single word. My hands squeeze the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turn white, and I can feel the leather creaking under my grip. Cian's breathing gets heavier and heavier like it always does right before a match. We're about to cross a line we can never come back from, but I keep seeing Mom's broken nose and swollen face in my mind. The address Dad gave us leads to a rundown apartment building with half the security lights broken and graffiti covering the walls. We park across the street and watch the third-floor window Dad said was Casper's. Around midnight, we see movement inside, a shadow passing by the window. Cian suggests we wait until morning when Casper leaves for work, somewhere public where we can grab him without neighbors hearing and calling the police. Every part of me wants to go up there right now and kick down his door, but Kian's right. We spent 13 months being smart about this, tracking Jason and gathering evidence. Rushing in angry now is how we get caught or hurt or worse. We drive to an all-night diner and slide into a corner booth. The waitress brings us coffee, and we sit there writing down everything Dad told us about Casper on napkins. His name, his age, his address, the fact that Dad paid him to do this. At 3 in the morning, my phone starts buzzing and Mom's name lights up the screen. My stomach drops because she never calls this late. I answer and hear her crying, asking where we are, saying she woke up from a nightmare about us getting hurt. I lie and tell her we're at Cian's apartment watching movies and eating pizza. She doesn't sound like she believes me, but she tells us to be careful and hangs up. We go back to Casper's building at 6 in the morning and park in the same spot. At 6:30, Casper comes out wearing a brown delivery truck uniform with a company logo on the chest. Cian takes photos of his license plate and the truck logo with his phone. We follow him to a big warehouse on the edge of town and watch him clock in through the front entrance. Now we know his schedule and where he works. Over the next week, we track Casper exactly like we tracked Jason. He works 10-hour shifts 5 days a week, stops at the same convenience store every night to buy beer, and goes straight home. His apartment is always dark by 10. He lives alone with no girlfriend or roommate that we can see. Cian finds Casper's social media accounts, and we spend hours going through his photos. There are pictures of him with Dad from years ago at barbecues and baseball games. Family gatherings we were never invited to. Birthday parties where Dad is smiling and hugging Casper like he's proud of him. A whole secret life Dad kept hidden from us and Mom. The photos make me feel sick because Dad chose this son over us. He paid him to hurt Mom and never once mentioned having another kid in all the years we were growing up. Cian finds posts from Casper complaining about money problems and child support payments he can't afford. This gives us more pieces of why Dad picked him. Dad probably promised Casper enough cash to solve all his financial troubles in exchange for scaring Mom. I scroll through more of Casper's social media and find photos from 3 years ago showing him at a kid's birthday party with a little girl. The caption says, "Best day with my princess," and there are dozens of comments about how he's such a good dad. I show Kian and he zooms in on Casper's face in the photo. He looks happy and normal, not like someone who would beat a woman half to death for money. But then Kian scrolls to posts from 6 months ago where Casper is complaining about his ex-wife taking him back to court for unpaid child support. He writes about how he might lose custody if he can't catch up on payments. One post says he owes over $20,000 and his wages are getting garnished. Another post from 2 months ago says he's desperate and needs a miracle. Dad must have seen these posts and knew exactly how to manipulate Casper into doing what he wanted. I feel sick thinking about how Dad used Casper's love for his daughter as leverage to get him to hurt Mom. Kian and I sit in his car outside Casper's apartment building and talk through our options for 3 straight days. I keep saying we should just go to the cops with everything we know, show them the security footage, tell them about Jason's new car and paid-off mortgage, explain how Dad has a history of paying people for favors. But Cian shakes his head every time and reminds me that Dad will hire an expensive lawyer who will tear apart our investigation. Jason will claim the money came from somewhere else and that his tattoo is common. Casper will say he was at work when Mom got attacked and his employer might back him up. Dad will cry in court about how his sons are trying to frame him because they're angry about the divorce that never happened. The prosecutor will look at our surveillance photos and recordings and say we conducted an illegal investigation that violated privacy laws. Everything we worked for over 13 months will get thrown out, and those 3 will walk free. I know Cian is right, but it makes me want to punch something. We need hard evidence that can't be explained away or dismissed. We need Casper to confess on record, or we need to catch Dad paying him. I suggest we record Casper admitting what he did, and Cian's eyes light up like he does when he figures out an opponent's weakness. We drive to an electronics store and buy a small voice recorder that fits in a pocket. Back at Cian's apartment, we practice what we'll say to Casper to get him talking. Cian will show him the security footage, and I'll tell him we know Dad paid him. We'll act like we already have proof and see if Casper panics and starts explaining. The key is to approach him somewhere public so he can't run or fight back, and to stay calm so he doesn't realize we're recording. We spend hours rehearsing different scenarios and responses until we have it down. For the next 2 weeks, we keep following Casper and learning his routine. Every Friday night, he goes to the same bar called Lucky's on the east side of town. It's a dive place with sticky floors and a pool table in the back corner. The lighting is dim, and the music is loud enough that conversations blend together. Nobody there pays attention to anyone else's business. It's perfect for what we need to do. On the third Friday, we follow Casper to Lucky's and watch through the window as he orders a beer and sits at the bar. We wait in the car until he's on his third drink and starting to relax. His shoulders drop and he's laughing at something the bartender says. That's when we walk in and slide into the booth directly across from where he's sitting. Casper glances over at us, and his expression goes from casual to confused. He stares at Kian and then at me like he's trying to figure out where he knows us from. Then recognition hits and his face goes white. He stands up fast and his bar stool scrapes against the floor. I lean forward and tell him to sit back down, that we just want to talk about what happened to our mother. My voice is calm but firm, and I can see Casper calculating whether he should run for the exit or hear us out. He sits back down slowly, and his hands are shaking as he picks up his beer. Kian pulls out his phone and opens the security footage from Mom's attack. He holds it up so Casper can see the screen and zooms in on the moment when Casper's mask slips and his face is visible for just a second. Casper's eyes go wide and he stammers that he doesn't know what we're talking about, that he's never seen that video before. But sweat is forming on his forehead and his leg is bouncing under the table. Kian zooms in on Jason's tattoo next and then back to Casper's face. I lean in close and tell Casper we know everything, that Dad already told us he hired Casper and Jason, that Jason admitted to being there. Casper's mouth opens like he wants to deny it, but no words come out. His face crumbles and he looks down at his beer like he's going to cry. Then he starts talking fast, words spilling out in a rush. He says Dad told him Mom stole money during their separation, that she was keeping Dad away from his sons, that she deserved to be taught a lesson about respect. The recorder in my pocket is running and catching every single word. Casper says he didn't want to hurt Mom that badly, that the plan was just to scare her, but Jason got carried away with the beating and wouldn't stop. He's making excuses and trying to shift blame, but he's still confessing to being there and participating. I ask him why he did it, and Casper's voice breaks. He says Dad promised him $15,000, enough to catch up on child support and keep his ex-wife from taking his daughter away for good. He says he was desperate, and Dad made it sound like Mom was a terrible person who had destroyed their family. My hands clench into fists under the table, but I force my voice to stay calm. I ask more questions about the planning, about when they broke in, about what Dad specifically told them to do. Casper keeps answering because he thinks we already know everything, and that cooperating might help him somehow. Kian asks when Dad paid him the money, and Casper says half up front and half after it was done. He pulls out his phone to show us his bank account as proof that he's telling the truth. His hands are shaking so badly he almost drops the phone, but he manages to pull up his transaction history. I take photos of his screen showing 2 cash deposits of $7,500 each. One is dated 5 days before Mom's attack, and one is dated 3 days after. It's perfect evidence that ties the payment directly to the timeline of what happened. Casper starts crying and saying he's sorry over and over. He says he needed the money so badly, that his daughter was going to be taken away, that Dad made Mom sound like she had ruined his life and deserved what happened. He begs us not to go to the cops because he'll lose his job and his kid and everything he's worked for. I feel absolutely zero sympathy for him because Mom could have died from the beating he gave her. Kian leans forward and his voice drops to something cold and final. He tells Casper he has 2 choices: turn himself into the cops within 24 hours and confess everything, or we take the recording and all the evidence straight to the police ourselves. Casper's face goes white, and he starts shaking his head fast, saying he can't go to jail. His daughter needs him. His ex-wife will never let him see her again if he gets arrested. He's begging now, asking if there's anything else he can do, any other way to make this right. I stand up and look down at him, telling him he has until tomorrow night to decide, and if he runs, we'll hunt him down and make sure he never sees his kid again anyway. We walk out of the bar without looking back, leaving Casper sitting there with his hands covering his face. In the parking lot, Cian and I stand by my car arguing in harsh whispers. I think we should go straight to the cops right now with what we have because giving Casper time is stupid. He's obviously going to run. Cian disagrees and says we need to give him the chance to do the right thing, that it'll look better in court if he turns himself in voluntarily. I tell Kian that Casper is a coward who beat up our mom for money. He's not going to suddenly grow a conscience. We go back and forth for 10 minutes until we compromise. We'll watch Casper's apartment tonight to make sure he doesn't disappear, and if he's still there tomorrow, we'll give him until the deadline. We drive to Casper's building and park where we can see his truck and his window. The lights in his apartment stay on until past 2 a.m., and we take turns keeping watch. Around 3 a.m., the lights finally go off and we both try to sleep in the car, one of us always keeping an eye on his truck. The next morning at 6 a.m., Casper's truck is still in the parking lot, and I start to think maybe Kian was right. Maybe Casper will actually turn himself in. We watch him leave for work at 7:30 a.m. in his delivery uniform like it's a normal day. Cian says we should tail him to make sure he actually goes to work and doesn't head for the highway instead. We follow his truck to the distribution center and watch him park and walk inside. I tell Cian we should go home and get some sleep. Come back tonight to see if Casper keeps his word. We head to Cian's place and crash for a few hours, but I can't really sleep because my mind keeps replaying Casper's confession and wondering if we're making a huge mistake. Around noon, Cian's phone rings and wakes us both up. It's a number we don't recognize, but Cian answers it anyway, putting it on speaker. The voice on the other end asks if we're looking for Casper, and my stomach drops. It's one of his co-workers from the distribution center saying Casper called in sick this morning and asked him to tell us if we came by. The co-worker sounds confused about why Casper would want him to pass a message to us, but we thank him and hang up fast. Cian and I look at each other and we both know what this means. Casper ran. We jump in the car and speed back to his apartment building. His truck is gone from the parking spot, and when we go up to his door and knock, nobody answers. I kick the door in frustration, and Cian pulls out his phone to call the distribution center back, pretending to be Casper's friend, asking if anyone knows where he might be. The person on the phone says Casper just called in sick for one day, not like he quit or anything, so he's probably still in town somewhere. We spend the entire day driving around to every place we think Casper might go. First, we check his ex-wife's house, but her car is there and Casper's truck isn't, so we don't knock because we don't want to scare her. Then we drive to Dad's house and circle the block 3 times, but there's no sign of Casper's truck. We try Jason's apartment next and sit outside for an hour watching, but Casper never shows up. By 6 p.m., we're running out of ideas, and I'm getting more and more angry that we let him slip away. Cian suggests checking cheap motels near the highway, because that's where someone would hide if they were planning to run, but hadn't left yet. We start at the north end of town and work our way south, checking parking lots at every rundown motel we pass. Finally, at 8 p.m., we spot Casper's truck parked outside a place called the Highway Rest Motel, one of those sketchy spots that rents rooms by the hour. Cian wants to go knock on doors until we find which room he's in, confront him again, and force him to come with us to the police. I'm done playing games, though, and I pull out my phone to call Mom. She answers on the second ring, and I can hear the TV in the background. I tell her we found the guys who hurt her, that we have evidence and a recording of one of them confessing, and that we're going to the police tonight to turn everything over. Mom starts crying immediately, but it's different from before. It's relief and fear mixed together. She begs us to be careful, to let the legal system handle it from here, to please not do anything that will get us in trouble or hurt. She keeps saying she can't lose us too, that she needs us safe more than she needs revenge. I promise her we'll do this the right way, that we're going straight to the police station right now, even though part of me still wants to drag Casper out of that motel room and make him pay personally for what he did. We drive to the police station and walk up to the front desk. I asked to speak with Detective Scott, who handled Mom's case originally, and the officer at the desk looks surprised but calls her. 20 minutes later, Detective Scott comes out to the lobby, and she looks older than I remember, more tired. She recognizes us immediately, and her expression is cautious as she leads us back to an interview room. The room is small, with a metal table and uncomfortable chairs, and there's a camera in the corner with a red light on. Cian and I sit down and start laying out everything we've found over the past 13 months. We show her the photos we took of Jason, the screenshots of Casper's bank deposits, the recording of Casper's confession at the bar. We tell her about Dad's secret son, about Jason's new car and paid-off mortgage, about following them and tracking their movements. We explain how we connected Jason's tattoo from the security footage to Dad's friend, how we found Casper through Dad's confession, how all the pieces fit together into a clear picture of conspiracy. Detective Scott sits with her arms crossed the entire time, and her expression gets harder and harder as we talk. When we finally finish, she's quiet for a long moment, and then she tells us we've conducted an illegal investigation. She says the recording might not be allowed in court because of consent laws, that we've potentially messed up the entire case by confronting suspects and threatening them. She asks if we assaulted anyone, if we made any threats, if we broke any laws during our investigation. My heart is sinking because we thought we were helping Mom get justice, but maybe we just made everything worse. I admit that we confronted Jason and Dad at Dad's house, that we might have scared them, but we didn't actually hurt anyone. Cian adds that we only followed people in public places and took photos that anyone could have taken. Detective Scott sighs and pulls out a notepad, telling us we need to write detailed statements about every single step of our investigation. She wants to know every person we followed, every piece of evidence we gathered, every conversation we had, every place we went. She says she needs to know exactly what we did, so she can figure out what parts of the case are still good and what parts we ruined. The process takes 4 hours, and my hand is cramping from writing by the end. We fill out page after page describing our surveillance of Jason, our tracking of Casper, our confrontation at Dad's house, our recording at the bar. Every time we think we're done, Detective Scott asks another question that requires 3 more paragraphs. By the time we finish, it's past midnight, and I'm exhausted and terrified that we're about to be arrested for stalking or harassment or something worse. Detective Scott collects all our statements and tells us she needs to talk with the district attorney about how to move forward. She says they'll be in touch and that we should not contact any of the suspects or do any more investigating on our own. We drive home in silence, and I can't tell if we just saved Mom's case or destroyed it completely. 2 days later, Detective Scott calls my phone and asks us to come back to the station. She suggests we bring a lawyer if we have one, and the tone of her voice makes it clear this isn't optional. It's more like a command. Cian and I are terrified because we think we're about to be arrested for everything we did. We don't have a lawyer and can't afford one, so we just show up at the station the next morning trying not to panic. Detective Scott meets us in the lobby again, but this time there's someone with her. A young guy in a suit who looks maybe 30 years old. She introduces him as Ada Kramer from the district attorney's office, and he shakes our hands with a firm grip. We follow them back to a conference room that's bigger than the interview room, with a long table and actual comfortable chairs. Ada Kramer sits down across from us and doesn't waste time with small talk. He tells us straight up that we created a huge mess by investigating on our own, that we could have destroyed the case against the people who hurt our mom. But then his expression shifts slightly, and he says that despite our methods being questionable, the evidence we gathered points to a clear conspiracy to commit assault. He's looked at the bank records, the photos, the security footage with Jason's tattoo, and even though the recording might not be allowed in court, everything else builds a solid case. He says if we cooperate fully going forward and stop doing anything on our own, he's willing to work with us to prosecute Dad, Casper, and Jason for what they did to Mom. Kramer pulled out a folder and spread photos across the table, pointing to the bank deposits we'd documented. He said the financial records were solid evidence because they showed a clear pattern of payments right before and after the attack. The photos of Casper and Jason together gave context to their relationship. But then he tapped the recording device we'd used at the bar, and his expression got serious. He explained that depending on state law, recording someone without their knowledge might not be allowed in court. The defense could argue it was obtained illegally and get it thrown out completely. My stomach dropped because that recording had Casper admitting everything. Kramer must have seen my face because he quickly added that even without the recording, the case was strong enough to move forward. He planned to bring Jason in for questioning within the next few hours and offer him a deal. If Jason agreed to testify against Dad and Casper, he'd get reduced charges or maybe just probation. Cian asked why we'd let Jason off easy, and Kramer said it was about building the strongest case possible. With Jason's testimony, they could prove Dad orchestrated the whole thing. Without it, Dad could claim he knew nothing, and Casper acted alone. Detective Scott nodded and said this was standard procedure in conspiracy cases. You flip the weakest link to get the bigger fish. I hated it but understood the logic. That same afternoon, Detective Scott and 2 other officers drove to the motel where we'd tracked Casper. Kramer let us wait at the station and watch through the window overlooking the parking lot when they brought suspects in. We sat there for 2 hours drinking bad coffee and barely talking. Finally, a police car pulled up, and I saw Casper in the back seat. The officers opened the door and Casper bolted the second his feet hit pavement. He sprinted toward the street, but Detective Scott had positioned the 3rd officer there. They tackled him hard onto the asphalt and cuffed him while he yelled about police harassment. Watching them walk him past the window in handcuffs should have felt satisfying. We'd spent 13 months tracking this guy. We'd confronted him, recorded him, and now he was finally caught. But instead, I felt empty. This wasn't the justice we originally wanted. We wanted to make him hurt the way he hurt Mom. We wanted him to feel scared and broken. Instead, he was just getting arrested and processed like any other criminal. Cian must have felt the same because he stared at the floor instead of watching Casper get brought inside. The whole thing felt too clean, too official, too far from the raw justice we'd imagined. Casper's lawyer showed up 3 hours later, some guy in an expensive suit who looked annoyed to be there. Kramer told us through the glass that Casper was invoking his right to remain silent on his lawyer's advice. This was completely normal and expected. Casper would sit in a holding cell until his arraignment hearing, probably in a day or 2. Then they brought Dad in for questioning. We couldn't hear what was happening, but we watched through the one-way glass as Dad sat across from Detective Scott looking small and scared. His lawyer arrived within 20 minutes and immediately shut down the questioning. Dad didn't say a single word. Then Jason came in separately with his own lawyer. Same result. Everyone lawyered up and refused to talk. Kramer said this was actually good for the prosecution because it meant they were scared and defensive. Innocent people usually wanted to explain themselves. Guilty people hid behind lawyers. Still, watching all 3 of them walk out of questioning without giving statements made me feel like we'd accomplished nothing. We had evidence and recordings and photos, but they were all just going to sit there silently and let their lawyers do the talking. The next week crawled by slower than any week of my life. Every morning I woke up expecting news and got nothing. Every afternoon I checked my phone hoping Kramer would call with updates. Cian and I tried to train at the gym, but our hearts weren't in it. We'd go through the motions of sparring and hitting bags, but the whole time we were thinking about the case. Mom called us every day asking if we'd heard anything. On Wednesday, she went to court with Detective Scott and got a protection order against Dad, Casper, and Jason. The order said none of them could contact her, come near her house, or be within 500 feet of her. Lila Rose from the hospital met with Mom that same day to explain court procedures. She walked Mom through what an arraignment was, what a preliminary hearing meant, what to expect if the case went to trial. Mom called me after that meeting sounding overwhelmed. She said there were so many steps and so much waiting. Lila told her these cases could take months or even years to fully resolve. I tried to sound encouraging, but honestly, I was just as frustrated as she was. Friday afternoon, my phone finally rang with Kramer's number. He said Jason's lawyer had reached out about a cooperation deal. Jason was willing to testify that Dad paid him and Casper to assault Mom. He'd say Dad planned everything as revenge for the cheating accusations from 5 years ago. Jason would explain how Dad contacted him, how much money was offered, how they planned the break-in to look random. In exchange, Jason wanted his charges reduced from assault to accessory, and he wanted no jail time. Just probation and community service. I felt my jaw clench as Kramer explained this. Jason had helped beat Mom until her face was unrecognizable, and he wanted to walk free. Kramer said the deal was contingent on Jason's testimony being truthful and complete. If he lied or held anything back, the deal was off and he'd face full charges. He asked what Cian and I thought about accepting the deal. I told him I needed to talk to Cian and call him back. 2 days later, Cian and I sat in Kramer's office discussing the deal. I said I hated everything about it. Jason should go to prison for what he did. Kramer leaned back in his chair and said he understood our feelings, but we needed to think strategically. Without Jason's testimony, the case against Dad was much weaker. Dad's lawyer would argue that Dad was just venting to his son about his ex-wife. They'd say Casper took it upon himself to act, and Dad had no knowledge of the attack. Casper would probably claim the same thing, that he misunderstood or acted alone. The bank deposits could be explained as legitimate family support. The security footage showed Casper and Jason, but not Dad. Jason's testimony was the link that connected everything. He could testify that Dad explicitly hired them, that Dad gave specific instructions, that Dad paid them afterward. With Jason's testimony, the conspiracy case was solid. Without it, the case was shaky. Cian asked what happened if we said no to the deal. Kramer said they'd prosecute Jason too, but all 3 defendants would probably get lighter sentences because the evidence was weaker. Or worse, Dad might get acquitted completely. We agreed to the deal even though it made us sick. Getting Dad convicted mattered more than punishing Jason. Mom was harder to convince when we told her. She cried and said Jason hurt her just as much as Casper did. Why should he walk free while Casper went to jail? I explained what Kramer said about the testimony being crucial. She asked if we trusted Jason to tell the truth. I said the deal required him to be completely honest, or he'd face full charges. After an hour of talking, she finally accepted it. She said she wanted Dad to pay for what he did more than anything. If letting Jason off was the price, she'd agree to it. 2 weeks later, Jason appeared in court and pleaded guilty to accessory to assault. He stood there looking at the floor while the judge explained his sentence. 2 years probation, 300 hours community service, and restitution payments to Mom for her medical bills. He agreed to testify fully and truthfully at Dad's and Casper's trials. Walking out of that courthouse knowing Jason was free made my hands shake with anger. 3 weeks after the arrests, Dad's arraignment finally happened. Cian and I sat in the courtroom watching Dad stand before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. The judge read the charges out loud. Conspiracy to commit assault. Dad's lawyer immediately entered a not guilty plea. Then the lawyer started arguing that Dad was just a father venting frustrations to his son. He said there was no evidence Dad explicitly ordered an attack. The payments to Casper were normal family support. Dad never intended anyone to get hurt. It was all Casper's misunderstanding and Jason's involvement. The prosecutor pushed back hard, citing Jason's cooperation agreement and upcoming testimony. The judge listened to both sides, then set bail at $50,000. I thought maybe Dad would have to stay in jail. But his lawyer pulled out a credit card right there in the courtroom and posted bail within an hour. Dad walked out a free man until trial. Watching him leave the courthouse in regular clothes, no handcuffs, no orange jumpsuit, made me want to scream. Casper's arraignment happened separately the next week. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea and immediately started attacking the evidence. He argued the security footage was too grainy to positively identify Casper. He said the bank deposits proved nothing because Dad could have been giving his son legitimate financial help. He claimed Casper was at work when the assault happened and had witnesses to prove it. Kramer stood up and methodically destroyed each argument. He had the bank deposits timed exactly with the attack. He had Jason's testimony placing Casper at the scene. He had the security footage showing Casper's face when his mask slipped. The judge wasn't buying the defense's arguments. He set bail at $75,000, higher than Dad's because Casper had actually committed the physical assault. Casper couldn't post bail. He stayed in jail waiting for trial. The preliminary hearings dragged on for 2 months with constant continuances and motions. Every time we thought we were making progress, some lawyer would file a motion to suppress evidence or request more time. Cian and I attended every single court date. We sat in the gallery behind Mom, showing Dad and Casper we weren't backing down. We wanted them to see us every time they walked into that courtroom. The stress started wearing on all of us. Mom stopped sleeping well and started taking medication for anxiety. Cian got short-tempered at the gym and snapped at people during training. I started having trouble sleeping because every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the confrontation at Dad's house. I kept thinking about how close we came to doing something we couldn't take back. How we almost became criminals ourselves trying to get justice. The legal system moved so slowly it felt like torture, but at least it was moving forward. At least Dad and Casper would eventually face real consequences. That had to be enough. One afternoon after a hearing, Detective Scott pulled Cian and me into a side hallway away from the crowd. Her face looked serious in a way that made my stomach tighten. She told us Dad's lawyer was building a case that we had harassed and threatened his clients. She said they had statements from Dad and Jason about the confrontation at Dad's house, and they were claiming we forced confessions through violence. Detective Scott looked us straight in the eyes and said we needed to stay away from Dad, Casper, and Jason completely, or we could face charges ourselves. The warning felt so unfair because we were the victim's family, but she made it clear she was trying to protect us. We agreed to keep our distance, even though every part of me wanted to show up at every court date and stare them down. Kian nodded and promised we'd stay away, and Detective Scott seemed relieved but still worried. She walked away and left us standing in that hallway, feeling like somehow we were the ones in trouble. The next week, my phone rang while I was at work, and Stanley Bailey's name popped up on the screen. My hands got sweaty because Stanley never called unless something was wrong at the gym. I answered, and he asked me to come in for a conversation about the case. His voice sounded different, not angry, but disappointed, and that made it worse. I drove to the gym after my shift ended and found Stanley in his office with the door closed. He gestured for me to sit down and asked directly if Kian and I had done anything illegal during our investigation. I could have lied, but Stanley had been our coach for 12 years, and he deserved the truth. I told him about following Jason and Casper, about the confrontation at Dad's house, about everything we did before going to the police. Stanley listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he just shook his head slowly. He looked disappointed but not surprised, like he'd suspected we'd crossed lines but hoped we hadn't. Stanley leaned back in his chair and said he'd support us as character witnesses if the court needed that, but the gym had to distance itself publicly from any vigilante activity. He reminded me that MMA training was supposed to teach discipline and control, not encourage people to take justice into their own hands. His words stung because he was right that we'd lost control. He said the gym's reputation depended on students using their skills responsibly, and he couldn't have people thinking he trained vigilantes. I understood what he meant, but it still hurt to hear him say the gym had to distance itself from us. Stanley told me I could keep training there, but I needed to be an example of doing things the right way from now on. I left his office feeling smaller than I had in years, like I'd let down someone who mattered. 4 months crawled by with more court dates and legal paperwork than I could keep track of. Then Kramer called and said Casper's lawyer had approached him about a plea deal. Casper was willing to plead guilty to aggravated assault in exchange for a recommended sentence of 5 years with possibility of parole. Kramer said he wanted to meet with us and Mom to get our input before responding to the offer. We drove to his office downtown and sat in a conference room with harsh fluorescent lights. Kramer laid out the details of the plea deal and explained that if Casper went to trial, he might get more time, but there was also a chance a jury could give him less. He said plea deals gave certainty, but often felt unsatisfying because the sentences seemed too light. Mom sat quietly while Kramer talked, and I could see her hands shaking slightly in her lap. When Kramer finished explaining everything, Mom surprised both Kian and me by saying she wanted to accept the plea. She said she was tired from the court process and didn't want to go through a trial where she had to testify and relive the attack in front of strangers. Her voice cracked when she talked about having to describe the beating in detail while Casper sat there watching. Cian and I were torn because 5 years felt too light for what Casper did to her. I thought about Mom's face in the hospital, purple and swollen, and 5 years seemed like nothing. But Mom kept saying she just wanted it over, that she needed to move on with her life and stop reliving that night. Kian looked at me, and I could see the same struggle in his eyes, wanting justice, but also wanting Mom to have peace. We told Kramer we'd defer to Mom's wishes since she was the victim and had to live with the outcome. Dad's trial got scheduled for 2 months after Casper's plea deal because Dad was refusing everything and insisting on his innocence. Kramer told us Dad's strategy was to claim that Casper and Jason acted independently and that any money he gave Casper was for legitimate family support. Dad's lawyer was going to argue that Dad had no idea what Casper and Jason were planning and was shocked when he found out. Kramer seemed confident the jury would see through the lies because the bank deposits were timed exactly with the attack, and Jason was going to testify that Dad orchestrated everything. The trial date appeared on our calendars like a countdown to something we'd been waiting for since the night we found Mom in the hospital. The week before Dad's trial was supposed to start, Kramer called with news that Dad's lawyer had contacted him with a last-minute plea offer. Dad would plead guilty to conspiracy to commit assault in exchange for 3 years in prison. I felt anger rise up in my chest, because 3 years was even less than Casper was getting, and Dad was the one who planned everything. Kramer said he'd already pushed back and demanded 5 years to match Casper's sentence. He said the negotiation went back and forth for hours, and they finally settled on 4 years. Kramer asked if we wanted him to reject the offer and go to trial anyway, but he warned that trials were unpredictable, and Dad might end up with less time if a jury felt sympathetic. Mom accepted Dad's plea deal with visible relief spreading across her face. She told us she just wanted this over so she could move on with her life and stop thinking about court dates and lawyers. Cian and I sat on her couch struggling with the outcome because 4 years felt so inadequate for planning an attack that could have killed her. I kept thinking about how Dad paid his own son to beat his ex-wife, how he orchestrated everything out of spite and wounded pride. 4 years seemed like nothing compared to the lifetime of trauma Mom would carry. But Mom kept saying she was done, that she couldn't handle more court appearances and more lawyers arguing about her life. We respected her decision, even though it felt wrong in our guts. Jason's sentencing hearing happened first since he cooperated with the prosecution. Kian and I sat in the courtroom with Mom and watched Jason stand before the judge in a suit that looked too big for him. The judge gave him 2 years probation, community service, and ordered him to pay restitution to Mom for her medical bills. Jason walked out of the courthouse a free man, and I watched him get into his car and drive away like nothing had happened. My hands clenched into fists, and I felt that familiar rage building in my chest. Kramer met us outside and reminded us that Jason's testimony was crucial for getting convictions against Dad and Casper. He said sometimes the justice system requires uncomfortable compromises to catch the bigger fish. I understood the logic, but it didn't make watching Jason walk free any easier. Casper's sentencing 2 weeks later was emotional in a way I didn't expect. His daughter was in the courtroom crying, maybe 10 years old, and I could see Casper trying not to look at her. The judge lectured Casper about betraying his own family and using financial problems as an excuse for violence. He said Casper had choices, and he chose to brutally assault an innocent woman for money. The judge gave him 5 years in state prison with parole eligibility after 3 and ordered him to pay restitution jointly with Jason. Casper's daughter sobbed louder when the bailiff led him away in handcuffs. Part of me felt satisfied seeing him taken to prison, but another part felt sick watching his kid lose her father. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand, and I knew she was thinking about how this whole mess had destroyed multiple families, not just ours. 2 weeks later, we sat in the courtroom for Dad's sentencing, and my stomach was twisted in knots. Dad stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit looking smaller than I remembered, his hands cuffed in front of him. The judge asked if he wanted to make a statement, and Dad nodded. He started talking about how he never meant for Mom to get hurt that badly, that he just wanted to scare her into admitting the truth about the cheating that never happened. He said he was sorry for everything, and that he'd made terrible choices driven by anger and pain. His voice cracked when he talked about losing his sons and his family. The judge's face stayed hard the whole time Dad spoke. When Dad finished, the judge leaned forward and said Dad's actions were calculated and cruel, that he'd planned and paid for a brutal assault on an innocent woman. The judge said Dad showed no real remorse until he got caught, and that his apology meant nothing compared to the trauma he caused. 4 years in state prison with no possibility of early parole. The bailiff led Dad away in handcuffs, and he looked back at us one time with tears on his face. Mom started shaking next to me, and then the tears came. We walked out to the hallway, and she just collapsed against the wall, sobbing. Cian and I held her while she cried and kept saying she never thought it would end like this, that she never wanted Dad to go to prison, that everything was so messed up. We got her to the car and drove her home. The whole ride, she stared out the window, not saying anything. At her house, we ordered Chinese food and put on her favorite romantic comedy. She barely touched the food, but she laughed a few times at the movie. We stayed until midnight making sure she was okay and didn't want to be alone. A week later, my phone rang while I was at Cian's apartment. Detective Scott's name showed on the screen and my heart started racing. She said the DA's office reviewed everything about our investigation and decided not to file charges against us. They considered the case closed with all 3 attackers convicted and didn't want to punish the victim's family for seeking justice on their own. The relief hit me so hard I had to sit down. I called Cian immediately and he actually yelled with happiness. We'd been worried for months that we'd end up in legal trouble for confronting Jason and Dad, for following people and recording Casper without permission. 2 days after that call, an envelope arrived with the DA's office return address. Inside was a letter from Kramer thanking us for our cooperation throughout the prosecution. He wrote that our methods were unorthodox, and he couldn't officially approve a vigilante investigation, but our evidence was crucial to securing all 3 convictions. He included pamphlets about victim services and counseling resources for trauma survivors. He also wrote that he hoped our family could find peace and healing now that justice had been served. The letter felt like closure even though it was just a piece of paper. Cian and I drove to the gym to talk with Stanley about coming back to training. We hadn't been there regularly in 6 months because of court dates and meetings with lawyers. Stanley met us in his office and looked us over like he was checking for injuries. He said we looked terrible, out of shape, and exhausted. I admitted we'd let training slide while dealing with everything. Stanley said he understood, but that if we wanted to come back, we had to attend anger management classes first. He said the gym couldn't have members who might lose control and hurt someone because they hadn't dealt with their rage issues. Cian started to argue, but I stopped him because Stanley was right. We'd almost destroyed our own lives chasing revenge, and we needed help processing that. The first anger management class was weird, because everyone else there was way older than us. The counselor was a woman in her 50s who asked us to introduce ourselves and explain why we were there. Cian and I took turns telling the story about Mom's attack and our investigation. The other people in the group looked shocked, and a few seemed impressed that we'd tracked down the attackers ourselves. The counselor didn't look impressed at all. She spent the next hour talking about how rage can feel righteous and justified, but it destroys the person feeling it just as much as the target. She said revenge and justice aren't the same thing, even though they can look similar from the outside. Over the next few weeks, she got us talking about how the anger drove every decision we made for 13 months. She made us see how we'd almost thrown away our futures and hurt innocent people in our quest to make Dad and his friends pay. The sessions were uncomfortable, but slowly something started shifting in how I thought about everything that happened. Mom started seeing a therapist who worked with crime victims and trauma survivors. She told us the nightmares were happening less often, but she still woke up scared sometimes. She was having trouble being in her house alone, especially at night. Kian and I spent a weekend installing new deadbolts on every door and adding cameras to cover blind spots the old system missed. We put motion sensor lights all around the outside of the house, so nothing could move near her windows without triggering bright lights. Mom watched us work and said she felt safer already just knowing we were making her house more secure. 3 months after all the sentencings, Mom called and asked us to come over. She had real estate listings spread across her kitchen table. She said she'd been thinking about moving to a different neighborhood because the current house held too many bad memories. Every room reminded her of that night, and she wanted a fresh start somewhere new. Kian and I spent the next 2 weeks driving her around to look at houses. She wanted something smaller, easier to maintain, with good security features already in place. We found a place near our gym that had reinforced doors and a good alarm system. The neighborhood was quiet with lots of families and people walking dogs. Mom's face lit up when we walked through it, and she said it felt right. The moving process took 3 weeks, and all of us worked together packing up the old house. Kian and I made sure Mom's new place had locks on every window and reinforced frames on the doors. We installed cameras covering every angle and set up the alarm system to call our phones if it triggered. Mom joked that her house was more secure than a bank vault now, but we could see the relief in her eyes when she locked the doors at night. Lila Rose from the hospital called Mom regularly to check on her recovery. She connected Mom with a support group for assault survivors that met twice a month at a community center. Mom was nervous about going at first and said she didn't want to sit around talking about being a victim. Lila convinced her to try one meeting. After that first meeting, Mom came home and said it actually helped to talk with people who understood what she'd been through. She started going regularly and made friends with other women who were working through their own trauma. She told us the group made her feel less alone and gave her hope that she could heal and move forward with her life. 6 months after the trials ended, Kian and I walked into our last anger management session. The counselor sat across from us with 2 manila folders on her desk. She opened them and pulled out letters she'd written for our records, stating we'd successfully completed the program and developed healthy ways to handle our anger. We signed some paperwork, and she handed us the letters in sealed envelopes. Stanley was waiting for us at the gym when we showed up that afternoon. We gave him the letters and he read them carefully, nodding as he went through each page. He walked to his office and came back with 2 cheap frames from the dollar store. He put our letters in the frames and hung them on the wall behind his desk, right next to his black belt certificates and competition photos. He tapped the frames and said they'd remind everyone that being strong meant controlling your emotions, not just your fists. We started training seriously again the next week. The discipline felt good after months of court dates and stress. Our sparring sessions were different now because we were more aware of the damage we could do. Every time I threw a punch at Cian, I thought about the responsibility that came with 13 years of training. He moved the same way, more controlled and precise instead of just trying to land hits. Stanley pushed us harder than he ever had before, making us do extra rounds and more technical drills. He was channeling our intensity into technique rather than letting us fight angry. One Saturday morning, Mom showed up at the gym. We were in the middle of a sparring round when I saw her walk in and sit on the bench near the door. It was the first time she'd seen us spar since before the attack happened. Cian and I worked through our combinations, blocking and countering with the precision Stanley had been drilling into us for weeks. When the round ended, I looked over and saw Mom wiping tears from her face. She walked over and hugged both of us, not caring that we were sweaty and gross. She told us she was proud of how we'd handled everything, even though the path had been messy and painful. That meant more to us than any championship belt ever could. A year after Dad got sentenced, Mom called me at work. She sounded stressed and said she needed to talk to Cian and me about something. We met at her house that evening and she showed us a letter that had arrived in the mail. The return address was the state prison where Dad was locked up. The envelope was still sealed and Mom said she didn't know if she should open it or throw it away. Kian picked up the envelope and looked at it for a long time. I told Mom it was completely her choice, that she didn't owe Dad anything, including reading whatever he wanted to say. She took the envelope from Cian, walked to the kitchen, and dropped it in the trash without opening it. She came back and said she was done with that chapter of her life. A few weeks later, Mom got a phone call from a victim advocate. The advocate explained that Casper's ex-wife wanted to apologize for what Casper had done. She had no idea Casper was planning to attack anyone, and she was horrified when she found out. The advocate asked if Mom would be willing to accept a letter. Mom agreed, and the letter arrived a few days later. Casper's ex-wife wrote that she was sorry for the pain Casper caused and that she hoped Mom could heal. She said she held no anger toward Mom and wanted her to know that Casper's daughter didn't know anything about the attack either. Mom sat at her kitchen table and wrote a response letter. She told Casper's ex-wife that she appreciated the apology and that she held no bad feelings toward her or Casper's daughter. She mailed it the next day and said it felt good to let go of some of the anger. Cian got a call from the director of a youth MMA program across town. They needed a new coach, and Stanley had recommended him. Cian went to check out the program and came back excited about the opportunity. He accepted the position and started coaching kids twice a week. I went to watch one of his sessions, and he was amazing with them. He taught them proper stance and basic combinations, but he also talked about respect and discipline. He told them that learning to fight meant learning when not to fight. Watching him work with those kids showed me how much we'd both grown from everything that happened. Around the same time, I started volunteering with a victim advocacy organization downtown. They helped families navigate the criminal justice system when someone they loved got hurt. My experience investigating Mom's case and going through the trials gave me knowledge that could help other families. I met with people who were confused about court procedures or scared about testifying. I explained what they could expect and connected them with resources. It felt good to turn our painful journey into something useful for others. On the anniversary of Mom's attack, the three of us had dinner at her new house. Mom cooked her famous lasagna, and we sat around her kitchen table talking about how far we'd come in a year. Mom said she was finally sleeping through the night without nightmares. Cian talked about how coaching the kids gave him purpose beyond just training. I shared stories about the families I'd helped through the victim advocacy program. We didn't get perfect justice because Dad would be out in 4 years and Casper in 3, but we got accountability and safety and the chance to heal together as a family. Life wasn't back to normal because normal didn't exist anymore after what happened. We'd built something different, though. Something better. A family that fought through darkness and made the choice to move forward with honesty and strength.
I collapsed at 78 pounds from hunger, and my mom poured water on the floor while I begged for a sip. When I said, "The law says you have to give me water," she smiled and said, "What law? Down here, we make the rules." I just stared at the puddle soaking into the concrete. That was over a decade ago. This morning, her hands were shaking too badly to sign her confession. "How did your parents control what you ate?" "My parents required me to fast for 1 hour for each dollar they spent on me because they believed children should feel the weight of their burden on the family. So a $20 purchase meant I wouldn't eat for almost a full day. They'd started when I turned 8, making me skip meals for small purchases, teaching me that my existence was a debt I could never repay. By 12, they solidified the rule, and soon I was fainting in class from accumulated fasting hours. The calculations ruled everything. Every meal, every pencil, every aspirin added hours to my debt. Dad would read receipts at dinner while I sat with an empty plate watching my parents eat. $3.50 for milk you drank last week. $15 for those secondhand shoes. $4 for mandatory school supplies. My stomach would cramp as the hours accumulated. Mom created spreadsheets tracking my consumption patterns and would circle areas where I cost too much, usually basic necessities I couldn't avoid. I spent every day paying for whatever they'd spent on me the day before. Sometimes the cycles overlapped and the fast would stretch on for days. One time I needed antibiotics insurance wouldn't cover, and I had to fast for a week. During the hunger periods, they made me write thank you notes with shaking hands. "Dear Mom and Dad, thank you for the $30 winter coat. I will gladly fast for 30 hours to show my appreciation." I became an expert at calculating the cost of staying alive. A $2 notebook meant 2 hours of hunger, but failing class meant summer school, which cost hundreds. Easy decision. But it wasn't always that straightforward. I'd stand in store aisles doing math in my head, weighing how many more hours of emptiness I could endure, adding up what I'd already spent that day, and what was coming up that I couldn't avoid. Sometimes I'd put items back and walk out with nothing, knowing my body couldn't take another dollar. By the time I was 13, I was starving, and I started begging for mercy. I'd wait until Mom seemed softer, usually after her evening wine, and plead for basic things without the fasting. "Please, just this once, I need tampons and I'm already 40 hours beyond." She'd stroke my hair sympathetically before explaining that suffering built character. "We're making you strong," she'd say while I cried from hunger. "Someday you'll thank us." When I threatened to tell the school what was going on, she just said, "They'll think you have an eating disorder like all the girls your age who didn't have parents to teach them what a real problem feels like." While those other kids were complaining about homework while I spent nights curled around my empty stomach, trying to sleep through the pain, I didn't have friends to confide in because I couldn't relate to anyone, and I was so locked inside myself with hunger. If I ever went out with anyone, I'd have to make excuses why I couldn't eat if it was during one of my fasts, or why I was gorging myself if it wasn't. Friends stopped inviting me places. Teachers questioned my parents about my weight, but Dad had rehearsed answers about growth spurts and fast metabolisms. The day I collapsed during PE, the nurse found me at 78 pounds. She threatened to call CPS, and my parents yanked me out of school so fast I didn't get to say goodbye to anyone. They said the state couldn't understand their advanced parenting methods. Homeschooling meant total control. No outside eyes to see me dying slowly in calculated increments, and nobody I could turn to for help. When I was 15, vision started failing from malnutrition. The eye exam cost $75, and the cheapest glasses were another $100. Dad announced this meant 175 hours without food, over a week of fasting. I knew my organs were already failing from years of starvation. Another week would unalive me. I started stealing food anywhere I could, shoving granola bars in my pockets at grocery stores and eating them in public bathrooms. Each stolen bite felt like rebellion and defeat combined. I couldn't believe this was what my life had come to. Then one day I was hiding in the library scarfing down pretzels I'd stolen from a drugstore, and someone had left out a book about children's legal rights. That's how I learned that parents must provide food, shelter, and medical care unconditionally. My parents had lied to me my whole life and said they didn't legally owe me anything at all. I copied the pages with shaking hands and brought them home. At dinner, while my parents enjoyed pot roast I couldn't touch, I set the papers on the table. "This is illegal," I said. "What you're doing to me is child abuse." Mom's fork clattered on her plate. Dad's face went dark as he read. "You ungrateful beach," Mom whispered, "after everything we've sacrificed for you." My father said, "Do you think I care what some book says? This is my house. I am the law." It turned out they'd seen my rebellion coming even before I had, and they'd prepared. Dad opened the basement door to reveal a small bedroom he'd set up. In reality, it was more like a jail cell. A bare mattress, a bucket bucket, stone walls. You think you're too good for our lessons? Mom grabbed my hair, yanking me toward the stairs. Let's see how your legal knowledge helps you down there. I fought back, but my malnourished body had no strength left. They dragged me down as I screamed for help no one would hear. The door slammed shut and I heard the lock turn. Mom's voice drifted through. We'll check on you in a week. By then, you'll be begging to show proper gratitude. Their footsteps faded upstairs. I pressed against the cold door and wondered if anyone would ever find me. The darkness pressed against me like a physical weight. I ran my hands along the walls, feeling for any weakness, any crack, any hope. The stone was smooth and cold, professionally sealed. They'd planned this carefully. My fingers found the bucket in the corner. The humiliation burned through me, even as my body shook from hunger. 78 pounds. The nurse had said 78 pounds. How much would I weigh after a week down here? I explored every inch of that basement prison. The mattress smelled like mildew. No blanket, no pillow. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, too high to reach. The switch must have been upstairs because I couldn't find any way to control it. They controlled even the light. Hours passed, maybe. Time meant nothing in that stone box. My stomach had stopped cramping, which scared me more than the pain. When your body stops asking for food, you're dying. The lock clicked above. I scrambled to the bottom of the stairs as the door opened. Mom stood silhouetted against the kitchen light, holding a glass of water. She descended slowly, each step deliberate. At the bottom, she held out the glass. I reached for it and she pulled it back. First, apologize. My throat burned. For what? For your ungrateful behavior. For threatening us with your little library research. I stared at the water. One sip, just one sip, but I knew this game. Give in now, and it would never end. The law says you have to give me water. She smiled and poured the glass onto the floor. The water spread across the concrete, soaking into the drain. What law? Down here, we make the rules. She climbed back up and locked the door. I dropped to my knees, trying to lick moisture from the damp concrete. The taste of dirt and mold filled my mouth. The light stayed on, always on. I tried sleeping, but the brightness burned through my eyelids. When exhaustion finally took me, nightmares of endless receipts and calculating hours filled my head. Dad's visit came next. Or maybe it was the same day. He brought a notebook and pen. Write your apology. 1 page for each year we've raised you. 15 pages of gratitude. I took the pen with shaking hands, started writing what they wanted to hear. Thank you for teaching me the value of money. Thank you for making me strong. Thank you for... The pen ran out of ink after 2 pages. That's unfortunate, Dad said. Looks like you'll need to try harder next time. He left me with the empty pen and notebook. I tried scratching words with just the tip, leaving grooves in the paper. Nothing they could read. Nothing that would free me. The pattern emerged through their visits. Mom came with water I couldn't have until I showed proper gratitude. Dad brought writing supplies that always failed. They were playing with me, each visit designed to break me a little more. I started hiding breadcrumbs of defiance. When Mom demanded I kneel before she'd speak to me, I counted the seconds in my head. Made it a game. How long could I stay on my knees before my legs gave out? 23 seconds, then 30, building strength even in submission. During Dad's visits, I studied him. Really studied him. The way his left eye twitched when he was angry. How he favored his right leg. Some old injury he'd never mentioned. The pattern of his breathing. Everything was data. Between visits, I exercised. Push-ups until my arms collapsed. Sit-ups until my empty stomach screamed. I was dying, but I'd die strong. Die fighting. The water torture continued. Mom would bring a full pitcher, set it just out of reach, and lecture me about gratitude while I watched condensation bead on the glass. Sometimes she'd accidentally spill it near enough that I could press my face to the floor and lick the puddle. She'd watch with satisfaction as I degraded myself for drops. I started saving my saliva, letting it pool in my mouth instead of swallowing. It gave the illusion of moisture, a tiny rebellion they couldn't see. Dad's writing assignments grew more elaborate. Write about every sacrifice we've made for you. Start from birth. But the pens were always defective, dry, broken, missing ink. He'd shake his head sadly at my empty pages and promise to bring better supplies tomorrow. Well, starting a story with, how did your parents control what you ate? And then diving straight into a fasting for dollars exchange rate is certainly one way to make regular childhood chores look like a vacation package. I used the broken pens as tools. Tried picking at the mortar between stones, scratched tallies on the wall behind the mattress to track time, each mark a promise I'd survive another day. The hunger had moved beyond pain into something else, a floating feeling. Sometimes I'd see things that weren't there, smell food that didn't exist. My body was eating itself. One visit, Mom brought soup. The smell nearly drove me insane. She sat on the stairs, eating slowly, describing each spoonful. Chicken, carrots, noodles, still warm. I pressed against the wall, trying not to watch, not to smell, not to want. All you have to do is admit you were wrong. Admit you're grateful for our lessons. Promise to follow the fasting rules without complaint. The words stuck in my throat. If I gave in now, I'd never get out. They'd know they'd broken me completely. I'm grateful, I whispered, louder. I'm grateful for your lessons. She smiled and ate another spoonful. I don't believe you yet. Maybe tomorrow. The soup smell lingered for hours after she left. I pressed my face into the mattress, trying to escape it, but it had soaked into everything. Dad discovered my wall scratches during his next visit. His face went dark as he counted them. 7 marks, 7 days. Destroying property now? That's $100 repair. You know what that means. 100 hours, over 4 days of fasting, on top of however long they planned to keep me here. He made me watch as he photographed the damage, calculating the exact cost of materials and labor to fix my tiny scratches. The theatrical cruelty of it, the performance of reasonableness hiding pure sadism. I stopped marking days after that, stopped trying to track time. It only gave them more weapons against me. The exercise continued in secret. Push-ups in the dark corner where they couldn't see from the stairs. Silent jumping jacks. Anything to keep my muscles from completely atrophying. My body was failing, but my will was hardening into something they hadn't expected. Mom's water games escalated. She'd bring ice cubes and place them just outside my reach, watching them melt into puddles I couldn't access. Sometimes she'd bring a damp cloth and wipe her face with it, sighing with relief at the coolness while I burned with thirst. But I was learning too, learning their schedules. Mom always came after her morning coffee, her breath still bitter with it. Dad visited in the evenings, after work, his shoes still carrying dust from outside. They were creatures of habit, and habits could be exploited. I started pretending to be weaker than I was, collapsed dramatically when they arrived, crawled instead of walked, let them think they were winning faster than they were. It made them careless. During one of Mom's visits, she set the water pitcher closer than usual, confident in my weakness. While she lectured about ungrateful children who didn't deserve parents who cared enough to teach hard lessons, I memorized the exact distance, the precise angle. The number of inches between my reach and relief. Dad brought a functioning pen once. A mistake, probably. He was tired, distracted by something at work. I wrote what he wanted, pages of groveling gratitude, while memorizing the feel of the pen, its weight, its balance, where he put it when he collected the pages. They thought they were teaching me dependence, but they were teaching me patience, strategy, the kind of desperate cleverness that comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. My body was shutting down. I could feel organs struggling, systems failing, but my mind was sharper than ever, focused on one thing, survival. Not just of my body, but of my spirit. They could lock me in this basement, but they couldn't lock up the part of me that refused to break. The game was changing. They just didn't know it yet. The visits became more unpredictable. Sometimes Mom would come twice in what felt like the same day. Other times, the silence stretched so long, I wondered if they'd forgotten me entirely. The uncertainty was another form of torture. During one of Mom's water visits, I noticed something new. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the pitcher. Not from emotion, but from something else. The tremor was subtle, barely visible, but I filed it away. Every detail mattered now. I began testing boundaries in small ways. When Dad demanded I write apologies, I'd position myself differently each time. First near the stairs, then by the wall, then in the corner. He'd order me back to the center of the room, but I was mapping his comfort zones, learning where he felt safest, where he felt threatened. The hunger had evolved into something beyond physical pain. My body had adapted to starvation in terrifying ways. My heartbeat slowed to conserve energy. My vision tunneled when I stood too quickly, but my hearing had sharpened. I could track their movements upstairs, learning their routines through footsteps and floorboard creaks. Mom's next visit brought a new cruelty. She carried a tray of fresh fruit, the smell of strawberries and melon filling the basement. She sat on the stairs and ate piece by piece, juice dripping down her chin. When she finished, she left the tray just outside my reach, the fruit peelings taunting me. I waited until her footsteps faded completely upstairs before making my move. The tray was 3 feet beyond where I could reach, but I'd been practicing. I removed my shirt, tied one sleeve to my ankle, and used it like a rope to drag the tray closer. The peelings had tiny bits of fruit still clinging to them. I ate every scrap, even the strawberry leaves. This small victory energized me more than the negligible calories. I could still think, still plan, still fight. Dad's patterns revealed themselves through repetition. He always checked his watch exactly 3 times during each visit. Always touched the doorframe before descending. Always counted the stairs under his breath. Obsessive-compulsive tendencies I could use. I started leaving things slightly out of place. The mattress at an angle. The bucket moved an inch. Tiny disruptions to his ordered world. He'd notice immediately, his eye twitching as he corrected each imperfection. It gave me control over his emotions, even if just for moments. The broken pens became tools. I used the sharp tips to work at the mortar between stones, not to escape, but to create hiding spots. Small gaps where I could conceal things. The fruit peelings became currency, saved and rationed for the darkest moments. Mom's tremor worsened with each visit. She tried to hide it, gripping the pitcher with both hands, but I saw. During one water game, she fumbled and actually spilled some within my reach. I lunged for it, lapping at the puddle while she scrambled back up the stairs. Her control was slipping. I discovered the basement had a drain in the corner, old and rusted but functional. When they poured water on the floor to torment me, I started positioning myself to direct the flow. Not all of it reached the drain. Some pooled in the uneven concrete, creating tiny reservoirs I could return to later. Dad brought a camera during one visit, documenting my deterioration. He made me stand against the wall while he took photos from different angles. I could see him calculating, planning something. The camera became another weapon in his arsenal, but also evidence. Evidence of what they'd done. My exercises evolved. I couldn't afford to waste energy on movements they might see, so I developed isometric routines, pressing against walls, tensing muscle groups in sequence. Invisible rebellion that kept my body from complete collapse. The light bulb became my enemy and ally. Always on, it disrupted my sleep, but also let me study every detail of my prison. I memorized each stone, each crack, each imperfection. The bulb itself was old, the filament visible through clear glass. I calculated how long it had been burning, how much longer it might last. Mom tried new psychological tactics. She'd bring my old belongings, things from my room. My favorite book, pages torn out, a stuffed animal from childhood, its stuffing removed. She'd describe how she was donating everything I owned, erasing my existence piece by piece, but her performance had cracks. When she held up a photo of me from healthier times, her hand shook so badly she dropped it. As she bent to retrieve it, I saw her pills fall from her pocket, small white tablets that scattered across the floor. She scrambled to collect them, but I'd seen the label, medication for neurological tremors. Dad's visits became more erratic. Sometimes he'd just stand at the top of the stairs, watching me without speaking. Other times he'd pace the basement, muttering calculations. The cost of my imprisonment, the price of electricity for the light, the value of the food I wasn't eating, everything reduced to numbers. I learned to perform weakness strategically. When I heard them approaching, I'd hyperventilate to make myself dizzy, then collapse at just the right moment. They wanted to see me broken, so I gave them a show while conserving my real strength for when it mattered. The notebook Dad left became useful in unexpected ways. I tore pages into strips, braiding them into rope. Weak rope, but something. I practiced knots in the darkness, my fingers learning patterns that might someday matter. Mom's soup visits were the worst torture. The smell would linger for days, driving me to hallucinations. I'd see bowls of food floating in the air, smell bread baking when there was nothing. But I used these delusions as motivation. Each false feast reminded me why I had to survive. During one visit, Dad made a mistake. He set his keys down while adjusting the camera, just for a moment. They were too far to reach, but I memorized their shape, their number, the worn pattern on the house key. Information stored for a future I had to believe in. The basement had a rhythm. The house above had patterns. The way they're using food and water as weapons is making me wonder about the psychology behind it. Like, why does watching someone suffer give them control? Those tiny victories with the fruit peels show such clever thinking. I learned when the furnace kicked on, when pipes rattled with water flow. These sounds became my clock, marking time in ways my captors couldn't control. I discovered that the drain connected to something. During heavy rain, I could hear water flowing below. The sound was distant, but real. The basement wasn't as isolated as they wanted me to believe. There were connections to the outside world, even if I couldn't reach them yet. Mom's condition deteriorated alongside mine. The tremors affected her balance now. She gripped the railing with white knuckles during each descent. Her lectures about gratitude became shorter, less coherent. Sometimes she'd forget what she was saying mid-sentence. I started a new game. When she demanded I beg. I'd use specific words that seemed to trigger her confusion, medical terms I'd overheard, phrases that reminded her of her condition. Her face would cloud, and she'd leave faster, forgetting to complete whatever torture she'd planned. Dad noticed Mom's decline, but said nothing. Their united front was cracking. During one visit, I heard them arguing upstairs, voices muffled but angry. The perfect family facade was crumbling, and I was both the cause and witness. The broken pens accumulated in my hiding spots. I'd found that the plastic tubes, when split, created sharp edges. Not weapons exactly, but tools. I used them to scrape at the concrete, creating rough surfaces that could catch and hold water. My body had found a terrible equilibrium, no longer losing weight because there was nothing left to lose. Organs functioning at the bare minimum. I'd become a creature of pure will, animated by spite and determination rather than calories. During a particularly cruel visit, Mom brought my report cards. She read my grades aloud, explaining how my education had cost them thousands, how each A was bought with their sacrifice. But as she read, I noticed she was holding the papers upside down. The tremors had affected her vision too. I played into her confusion, agreeing with grades that weren't there, thanking her for classes I'd never taken. Her frustration grew as reality slipped further from her grasp. For the first time, I felt something like pity. Then I remembered the basement door locking, and the pity died. Dad's camera sessions revealed his own instability. He'd take the same photo dozens of times, never satisfied with the angle. His obsession with documentation had become compulsion. He needed evidence of my suffering, but no amount was ever enough. I learned to position myself to make his photos harder, turning slightly so shadows fell wrong, blinking at the moment of capture. Small rebellions that sent him into fits of perfectionist rage. He'd waste entire visits trying to get the perfect shot of my degradation. The basement walls had become my calendar, not with marks they could see, but with tiny scratches in hidden places. Each visit cataloged. Patterns emerged. Mom came every 36 to 48 hours. Dad every 24 to 30. The gaps were widening. During one water torture session, Mom's tremor caused her to drop the entire pitcher. It shattered on the concrete, sending water and glass everywhere. She stared at the mess, confused, then fled upstairs without a word. I spent hours carefully collecting the larger shards, hiding them in my growing arsenal. Dad's next visit brought a new horror. He'd calculated the cost of my existence from birth, hospital bills, diapers, formula, every expense itemized in a ledger he read like scripture. The total was staggering. More hours of fasting than years of life. But his math had errors. Numbers transposed, calculations repeated. His obsessive need for precision was failing him. I didn't correct him. Let him live in his false mathematics while I built my own equations for survival. The glass shards became tools for marking time in new ways. Tiny cuts on my fingertips, controlled and deliberate. Physical markers that couldn't be erased by confusion or tremors. My body was a record they couldn't edit. Mom's visits became more sporadic. Sometimes she'd open the door, stare down at me, then close it without entering. Other times she'd make it halfway down before retreating. Her fear was growing. Fear of the basement. Fear of what she'd created. Fear of me. I used her fear, positioning myself in shadows when I heard her coming, moving in ways that emphasized my skeletal frame, becoming the monster she'd made, reflecting her cruelty back in physical form. She'd wanted to break me. Instead, she'd created something that haunted her. Dad tried to maintain control through routine. Same time visits, same demands, same documentation. But routines could be disrupted. I'd pretend to be asleep when he arrived, forcing him to decide whether to wake me. Each decision revealed more about his psychology. The basement had taught me patience beyond human limits. I could remain motionless for hours, conserving energy while my mind raced through possibilities. Every visit provided new data. Every interaction revealed weaknesses. I was becoming something they hadn't anticipated, a student of their destruction. Mom's medication increased. I could tell by the severity of her tremors, the glassiness of her eyes. She'd sometimes call me by the wrong name, mixing me up with relatives I'd never met. Her grip on reality was loosening faster than my grip on life. During one visit, she brought baby photos, pictures of me as an infant, healthy and loved. She cried as she showed them, but I couldn't tell if she mourned that child or regretted what came after. The photos fluttered from her shaking hands, scattering across the floor. I collected them after she left, not from sentiment, but for the information they contained, background details, the layout of rooms I'd forgotten, faces of relatives who might still exist somewhere, pieces of a life before the basement. Dad's documentation obsession escalated. He brought measuring tapes, recording my dimensions like I was livestock, the circumference of my arms, the width of my shoulders, all entered into his ledger with corresponding cost calculations, so many dollars per pound of flesh. But his measurements were inconsistent, numbers that couldn't possibly be right. His need for precision warred with failing faculties. I watched him measure the same distance 3 times, getting 3 different results, his frustration mounting with each attempt. The light bulb finally showed signs of failing, flickering occasionally. Each flicker sent Dad into a panic, checking his calculations for the cost of replacement. The thought of me in darkness terrified him more than my suffering. He needed to see his work. I began hoarding everything, threads from the mattress, splinters from the stairs, even my own hair as it fell out in clumps, raw materials for plans still forming. The basement was teaching me that anything could be a tool if you were desperate enough. Mom's final coherent visit came on what must have been a Tuesday. I knew because I could hear the garbage truck outside, its routine the only reliable marker of time. She sat on the stairs, no water pitcher, no food, just sitting. She tried to explain something, but the words tangled. Something about sacrifice and love getting confused, about meaning to teach strength but teaching something else instead. Her tremors were so bad she could barely hold the railing. When she left, she forgot to lock the door. I stared at the open door for 3 heartbeats before Dad's footsteps thundered down. He slammed it shut, the lock clicking with finality. But we both knew what had happened. The perfect system was breaking down. His rage was cold and calculated. He added the cost of Mom's mistake to my debt. The seconds of open door translated to hours of fasting. But his math was more erratic than ever. Numbers that made no sense. Calculations that contradicted themselves. I'd stopped trying to stand when they visited, not from weakness, but from strategy. Let them think I was finished. Let them believe their victory was complete. While my body played dead, my mind was more alive than ever. The basement had become my teacher. Every surface memorized, every sound cataloged, every pattern analyzed. I knew which stones were loose, which stairs creaked, where water pooled, where shadows fell. Knowledge they'd forced me to gather through suffering. Mom stopped coming entirely. I could hear her upstairs sometimes, footsteps shuffling in random random patterns. Dad's visits doubled, trying to maintain both roles, but he couldn't replicate her specific cruelties. His were all numbers and documentation. Hers had been personal. During what I calculated was my 40th day, based on the pattern of garbage trucks and furnace cycles, Dad made his biggest mistake. He brought a flashlight to check the corners of the basement, convinced I was hiding something. He was right, but he looked in the wrong places. The flashlight was heavy, metal, with fresh batteries. He set it down to adjust his camera, just for a moment, but I'd learned that moments were all I needed. My skeletal hand shot out, not for the flashlight, but for the batteries inside. By the time he noticed, I'd already hidden them. Batteries meant power. Power meant possibilities. I began working on the light bulb fixture, using the glass shards to strip wires when he wasn't visiting, not to electrocute anyone, but to control the light, to take back one small piece of agency. Dad's paranoia grew. He'd check the same corner 5 times, count the stones repeatedly, measure distances that hadn't changed. His need for control was consuming him, just as hunger had consumed me. We were both prisoners now, locked in a dance of mutual destruction. The house above grew quieter. Mom's footsteps had stopped entirely. Dad's movements were erratic, sometimes pacing all night. The perfect family had collapsed, leaving only the basement and its occupants, the jailer slowly going mad, and the prisoner who'd found clarity in starvation. Playing hide and seek with batteries while Dad counts the same rocks 5 times really shows who's winning the crazy contest down there. The kids turned into some kind of basement ninja, collecting glass shards and mapping pipe sounds like they're planning a prison break, while Mom can't even hold papers right side up anymore. I fashioned tools from everything. The batteries and wire created tiny shocks, useful for staying alert. The glass became cutting implements. The threads and hair made rope. The broken pens became picks. An arsenal built from garbage, invisible to eyes looking for traditional weapons. Dad's final documented visit showed his complete unraveling. He brought every receipt from my entire life, boxes of them. He spread them across the basement floor, trying to create some master calculation, the total cost of my existence. But the numbers wouldn't cooperate. They swam and shifted, defying his obsessive need for order. I watched him work for hours, neither of us speaking. His frustration mounted as calculations failed, papers scattered, pen after pen running dry. He was trying to solve an equation that had no solution, how to balance love and cruelty, care and control. When he finally left, he took the receipts but left something crucial, hope, because in his madness, he'd revealed the truth. The basement door had 3 locks, but he'd only engaged one. His shaking hands, so focused on numbers, had betrayed him. I waited through another garbage truck cycle, another furnace rhythm. When I was certain he wouldn't return immediately, I made my move, not to the door, but to prepare. Every tool gathered, every piece of knowledge reviewed, every ounce of strength marshaled. The basement had been my prison, but also my education. It taught me patience, planning, and the price of survival. Now it was time to graduate. The next phase required careful timing. I'd learned their patterns, their weaknesses, their fears. Mom's tremors had taken her out of the game. Dad's obsession had become his vulnerability. The perfect prison had imperfect jailers. I positioned my tools strategically. Glass near the stairs for distraction, wire near the door for my real purpose. The flashlight batteries connected to create maximum shock. Everything in place for when the moment came, because it would come. Their system was unsustainable, built on cruelty that had consumed them as much as me. The basement had made me into something they never intended, a survivor who understood them better than they understood themselves. The waiting was different now. Not the helpless waiting of a victim, but the patient waiting of a predator. They'd stripped away everything human, leaving only Will. Will focused on a single goal, the other side of that door. I heard Dad's footsteps above, pacing in mathematical patterns, counting steps like he counted dollars, building equations that would never balance. The perfect family reduced to obsessive calculation and neurological decay. The light bulb flickered again. Soon it would die, plunging us all into darkness. But I didn't fear the dark anymore. The basement had taught me to see without light, to know without seeing. Every surface, every distance, every possibility mapped in my mind. My body was destroyed, but my spirit was titanium, forged in starvation and neglect, shaped by cruelty into something unbreakable. They'd wanted to teach me a lesson about gratitude. Instead, they'd taught me about endurance. The next garbage truck would mark day 42, the perfect number for what came next. 6 weeks of education and survival. 6 weeks of learning their weaknesses. 6 weeks of planning my graduation from the basement university of suffering. I settled into position, conserving energy for what was coming. The game was almost over. The calculations nearly complete. The basement had one more lesson to teach, but this time I would be the teacher. The lock clicked above. Dad's footsteps on the stairs, uneven now. His breathing labored from weeks of obsessive pacing. He descended into the basement, unaware that the power dynamic had already shifted. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. They needed me to be their victim more than I needed them to be my parents. Without me to torture, they had nothing. Without them, I had everything. The flashlight beam swept the basement, searching for violations of his order, finding none because I'd been careful. But he kept looking, driven by paranoia that something had changed. He was right. Everything had changed. I remained motionless, playing the broken doll he expected to see. Let him document my degradation one more time. Let him add figures to his ledger. Let him believe his control was absolute. The basement had taught me that belief was the greatest weakness of all. Because tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, he would make another mistake. The door would open, and when it did, I would be ready. Not with violence, but with the patient determination of someone who'd survived the unsurvivable. The basement had been my prison. Soon, it would be my launching pad. The calculations were complete, the lessons learned, the student ready to surpass the teachers. Dad finished his documentation and turned to leave. 3 steps up the stairs, he paused. Something felt wrong to him. Some instinct warning that the prey had become predator. But he dismissed it, trusting in locks and walls and control. The door closed. The lock clicked, but this time, I smiled, because I'd heard what he hadn't. The second lock hadn't engaged properly. Mom's tremoring hands had damaged it during her last visits. Another crack in their perfect system. I gave him time to settle upstairs, to return to his pacing and calculating. Then I began my work, slow and careful, preserving energy for the moment when preparation became action. The basement waited with me. We'd become partners in this dark education. It had sheltered my transformation from victim to survivor. Now it would witness my final exam. The light bulb gave one last flicker, then died. Darkness flooded the basement, but I didn't panic. I knew every inch of this space. The darkness was my ally now, hiding my movements from any watching eyes. In the black silence, I prepared. prepared. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but I was ready. The basement had given me its final gift, the knowledge that I could survive anything, because they'd already done their worst, and I was still here, still thinking, still planning, still fighting. The student was ready to leave school. The darkness became my workshop. I moved through the basement with purpose, gathering my tools by touch alone. The glass shards wrapped in torn fabric, the wire stripped from the light fixture, the batteries positioned for maximum effect, each piece exactly where I needed it. Dad's footsteps paced above in their mathematical pattern. 17 steps east, pause, 17 steps west. The rhythm never varied anymore. His obsession had become predictable, and predictability meant opportunity. I tested the door mechanism in the darkness. The first lock engaged properly, but the second made a grinding sound when it tried to catch. The third hadn't been used in weeks. Dad's deteriorating focus had created the opening I needed. The furnace kicked on, masking any sounds I made. I worked the wire into the damaged lock mechanism, feeling for the weak point Mom's trembling hands had created. Metal scraped against metal. The lock resisted, then gave slightly. Progress measured in millimeters, but progress nonetheless. My fingers cramped from the delicate work. I paused, flexing them carefully, then resumed. Time meant nothing in the darkness. Only the work mattered. The lock would yield eventually. Everything yielded if you had patience. Dad's pacing stopped. I froze, wire still in the lock, listening. His footsteps moved toward the basement door. I slipped back to my usual position, hiding the wire in my palm. The door opened, spilling light down the stairs. He descended with a flashlight, sweeping it across the basement. I remained motionless, eyes closed, playing the broken creature he expected. The beam lingered on me, then moved to check his usual concerns, the mattress position, the bucket placement, the walls for new marks. Satisfied, he turned to leave. At the top of the stairs, he paused. I heard him testing the locks. 1 click, 2 clicks. The third lock remained unused. He muttered something about electricity costs and closed the door. I waited through 50 of his pacing cycles before returning to work. The wire found its way back into the lock mechanism. Push, twist, feel for the catch. My makeshift tools were crude, but the basement had taught me that crude tools in patient hands could accomplish miracles. The second lock finally gave. A soft click that sounded like thunder in the darkness. I held my breath, waiting to see if Dad had heard. His pacing continued unchanged. 17 steps east, 17 steps west. 1 lock remained, the easiest one, ironically. Dad engaged it out of habit, not security. A simple mechanism that would take seconds to defeat when the time came, but not yet. Preparation meant nothing without proper timing. I spent the next hours practicing movement in absolute darkness, from mattress to stairs in complete silence, testing which stairs creaked and which held firm, memorizing the exact height of each step. My body might be skeletal, but it could still move with purpose. The garbage truck rumbled past. Wednesday morning. Dad would leave for work soon, his routine as rigid as his calculations. Mom hadn't moved upstairs in days. The house would be as empty as it ever got. I heard Dad's alarm, his footsteps to the bathroom, water running, the coffee maker gurgling, each sound marking progress toward my window of opportunity. He never checked the basement before work anymore. Why would he? The prisoner was secure. The front door closed. His car started. I counted to 1,000, then began. The wire slipped into the first lock. My practiced movements made quick work of it. The mechanism yielded like an old friend. I pushed against the door. It moved an inch, then stopped. Something was blocking it. I pushed harder, feeling the obstruction shift. A chair. Talk about taking reduce, reuse, recycle to a whole new level. This kid's turning trash into an escape kit like some kind of basement MacGyver. Dad's up there counting receipts from 1987 while his prisoners downstairs building shock devices from old batteries. The man's so busy calculating the price of raising a child, he forgot to check if said child was planning a jailbreak with dental floss and broken. He'd started barricading the door from the outside, but the chair was light, movable. Using the door as leverage, I worked the chair aside inch by inch. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite my body's inability to properly regulate temperature anymore. The chair scraped against the floor. Too loud. I paused, listening. No response from upstairs. Mom must be in one of her medication hazes. I continued working the chair aside until the gap was wide enough for my emaciated frame. 78 pounds had its advantages. I emerged into the kitchen, blinking against the light. Everything looked foreign after 6 weeks of stone walls. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, normal sounds that felt miraculous. My legs trembled as I stood fully upright for the first time in weeks. I gripped the counter, waiting for the dizziness to pass. No time for weakness. Dad would return for lunch in 4 hours. His routine never varied. I needed supplies, food, water, clothes, money. But first, I needed to ensure Mom couldn't interfere. I crept upstairs, each step careful and deliberate. Her bedroom door was open. She lay in bed, pills scattered on the nightstand, breathing shallow but steady. Her purse sat on the dresser. I found $43 and change. Her cell phone, car keys. I took it all. She stirred but didn't wake. The medication had her deep. My old room was exactly as I'd left it. Clothes still in the closet. I dressed in layers, hiding my skeletal frame. Everything hung loose, but it would do. I filled a backpack with essentials, more clothes, the hidden cash from my dresser drawer, $27 I'd saved from birthday cards. The kitchen demanded careful navigation. I couldn't eat much without making myself sick. Small bites of bread, sips of water, a banana that my stomach immediately rejected. I cleaned the mess, leaving no evidence. Dad's office drew me. His precious calculations had to be there. I found them immediately. Boxes of receipts, ledgers of my debt, the camera with its memory card full of basement documentation, evidence of everything. I took the camera and one ledger, proof, if I needed it. Then I noticed his computer, still logged in. His obsession with documentation extended to digital files, folders labeled with my name, years of spreadsheets tracking every penny spent on my existence. I inserted a thumb drive from his desk and copied everything. The progress bar crawled across the screen, 20%, 40, 60. Time ticked away, but I needed this evidence. The files finished copying. I pocketed the drive and moved to leave, then stopped. On his desk sat a framed photo. Our family, years ago, before the calculations, before the basement. I looked healthy. They looked human. I left it there and headed downstairs. The front door beckoned, but I knew better. Neighbors would notice a skeletal teenager stumbling down the street. I needed a different exit strategy. Mom's car keys weighed heavy in my pocket. I'd never driven, but I'd watched. How hard could it be? The garage door opener was on the kitchen wall. I pressed it, wincing at the mechanical grinding. The car started on the third try. I adjusted the seat, barely able to reach the pedals. The gear shift confused me until I found drive. The car lurched forward. I slammed the brakes, heart racing. Deep breath, try again. again, gentle pressure on the gas. The car rolled forward. I made it to the street, turning randomly, just needing distance. Each intersection was a victory, each mile a miracle. I drove until the gas light came on. A rest stop appeared ahead. I pulled in, parking crooked but safe. My hands shook as I turned off the engine. I'd done it. I'd escaped. But escape was only the beginning. I had $70, a car I couldn't legally drive, a body that barely functioned, and parents who would eventually notice their prisoner had graduated from their basement university. I found a payphone and dialed the only number I remembered, my aunt in the next state, Mom's sister who'd stopped visiting years ago after some argument I'd never understood. The phone rang. Once, twice. She answered on the third ring. I managed 3 words before my voice cracked. She heard enough. An address. A promise to wait. Help was coming. I sat in the car, doors locked, watching the highway. Dad would be home in 2 hours. He'd find the empty basement, the missing evidence, the truth that his perfect system had failed. A truck stop diner glowed across the parking lot. My stomach cramped with emptiness, but I knew better than to trust it yet. Recovery would take time. Everything would take time. But I had time now. My own time. Not measured in dollars and debt. An hour passed. Then 2. Dad would be discovering the empty basement now. I pictured his face. The calculations that wouldn't compute. The control that had slipped away while he counted receipts. My aunt's car appeared as the sun set. She stepped out, and I saw the shock register on her face. 78 pounds was harder to hide in person, but she didn't hesitate. She wrapped me in a blanket and helped me to her car. We drove through the night. She asked no questions, just handed me small bottles of water and crackers. I dozed between sips, my body finally believing it was safe enough to rest. I woke in a hospital room, IV in my arm, monitors beeping, a doctor explaining refeeding syndrome, organ damage, long-term effects, but also recovery, possibility, future. The police came with questions. I showed them the ledger, the camera, the thumb drive. They took notes with serious faces. Adult Protective Services got involved, paperwork and protocols, systems designed to help, not hurt. My parents were arrested 2 days later. Dad had been found in the basement, surrounded by receipts, trying to calculate where his system went wrong. Mom was barely coherent, her tremors so bad she couldn't hold a pen to sign her confession. The prosecutor said it was one of the worst cases of child abuse she'd seen. The systematic starvation, the psychological torture, the basement prison, all documented by Dad's own obsessive need to record everything. They both pled guilty. Dad got 15 years, Mom got 10 with mandatory medical treatment. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was too busy learning to eat again, to walk without falling, to exist without calculating the cost. Recovery wasn't linear. Some days I couldn't keep food down. Other days I ate until I was sick, my body still convinced each meal might be the last. Therapy helped, but trusting anyone took time. My aunt became my guardian. She never once mentioned the cost, never calculated what I owed. She just provided, the way parents are supposed to. It felt foreign and wonderful and terrifying. I returned to school eventually. Different school, different state, different life. The other students had no idea why I was so thin, or why I sometimes stared at the cafeteria food like it might disappear. That was okay. My story wasn't for them. College felt impossible until a counselor mentioned scholarships for abuse survivors. I applied to 7, got 5, chose the one farthest from that basement, studied nutrition of all things. Understanding the science of what had been done to me helped somehow. I graduated with honors. My aunt cried at the ceremony. I'd gained 40 pounds by then. Still thin, but healthy. Alive. Free. The job offers came. I chose a position at a children's hospital, working with kids who couldn't eat for medical reasons, teaching them that food wasn't the enemy, that their bodies deserved nourishment, that they were worth every penny spent on their care. Sometimes I still calculate costs automatically. Old habits die hard. But now I catch myself and buy the thing anyway. A coffee, a book, a winter coat that costs $30. No fasting required. My parents' house sold at auction. The basement was renovated, turned into a family room by the new owners. They had no idea what those stones had witnessed. That was probably for the best. I kept one thing from that life, the thumb drive with all of Dad's calculations, evidence of their sickness, but also proof of my survival. Someday I might delete it. Today isn't that day. The other survivors I've met all have different stories but similar scars. We recognize each other in small ways. How we hoard food, how we flinch at certain phrases, how we calculate escape routes even in safe spaces. But we also recognize the strength, the titanium spirits forged in suffering, the knowledge that we survived the unsurvivable. The basement taught terrible lessons, but it also taught me I could endure anything. My life isn't perfect. I still have health issues from the years of starvation. Trust comes hard. Relationships are complicated, but it's my life, not measured in debt or dollars, not controlled by anyone else's calculations. Every meal is a choice now. Every bite an act of rebellion against those who tried to starve me. I eat when I'm hungry, stop when I'm full. Simple freedoms that feel revolutionary. The basement is gone from my life, but not from my dreams. Sometimes I wake in darkness, feeling for stone walls, but then I turn on the light, see my own apartment, my own space, my own life. The relief never gets old. I volunteer at a crisis hotline twice a month, talking to kids who see no escape, who believe their parents' lies about what they deserve. I tell them about legal rights, about survival, about the possibility of graduation day. Some listen, some don't, but I keep answering the phone, keep sharing what the basement taught me. Not the cruelty, but the endurance. Not the starvation, but the strength that comes after. My story isn't unique. Too many basements, too many calculations, too many children learning their expensive burdens. But survival stories need telling. They're proof that the basement doesn't have to be the end. I'm 32 now. Healthy weight, stable job, good life. The girl who weighed 78 pounds feels like a different person, but I carry her with me. She's the reason I survived, the reason I fight, the reason I know that no matter how dark the basement, graduation day is possible. The cost of my existence, immeasurable. The value of my survival, priceless. The basement taught me math, but I've learned better equations since. Ones where every life has infinite worth, where children are investments, not debts, where love doesn't require payment. My parents are eligible for parole next year. I won't attend the hearing. I've said everything I needed to say. The basement spoke for me. The evidence convicted them. My survival is testimony enough. I eat dinner now without calculating, sleep without hunger, live without debt. The basement is behind me, but its lessons remain. I survived. I escaped. I graduated. And that diploma is mine to keep. If you made it to the end, drop a comment and I'll catch you in the next one.